We now come to the general debate on Ukraine. I call the Secretary of State, I believe, the Secretary of State to move.
Madam Deputy Speaker, thank you. Yesterday marked a milestone that none of us wanted to see. 4 years of Putin's war on Ukraine. 4 years of his brutal, full-scale invasion of this sovereign nation. A country, a proud country, that has fought back Putin's attacks and, let us not forget, has suffered 12 years under a pain of occupation. So this week, we stand with the families mourning loved ones, the troops fighting on the front line, and the millions displaced from home, yearning for the opportunity to return. Madam Deputy Speaker, 4 years ago today, a dozen Ukrainian border guards on the tiny isolated Snake Island in the middle of the Black Sea were surrounded by Russian sea and air forces. And when the Russians radioed to demand their surrender, the Ukrainians told the ship's command, "Get lost." Well, in fact, they told them in stronger terms that I can't repeat this afternoon in this House. But that defiance has driven Ukrainian resistance to Russia every day of the conflict since. And in Kyiv last month, that defiance burned fiercely when I met emergency workers, military chiefs, Ukrainian ministers and President Zelensky himself. Because Ukrainians, civilians and military alike, are still fighting with the same courage and determination which inspired the world in February 2022. I will indeed.
I'm sorry this is thanks, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm sorry this is early, but I just want to reflect. I was in Kiev at the same time as the Secretary of State, so I wanted firstly to thank him for his visit. We were there at the same time. And I was there also to see the apartment block where second responders were hit with a double tap strike, as in they'd gone to respond to rescue those and then they were hit. The Secretary of State is aware of the desperate need of air defence missiles and the lack of Patriots that are going in. Please, I know you'll address this, but is this something that's been raised with the utmost urgency? We need to defend Ukraine's skies.
Well, first I thank the honourable gentleman for his visit to Kyiv and the fact that members on all sides of the House have regularly been to Ukraine. That lifts the morale of Ukrainian people. It reminds the Ukrainian people that we, the UK, stand with them as strongly now as we did 4 years ago. And the honourable gentleman is right. That morning I arrived in Kyiv. It was a morning when 90 Shahed drones had hit the city overnight. 21 of them had been targeted directly at residential accommodation, and the block that he and I both visited, which had the side of it ripped open by one of the drone strikes, was hit twice, deliberately, an hour and a half apart, so that those emergency workers that had gone in to help those suffering from the first strike were then hit and in one case killed by the second. This is an indication of the cynical tactics, the illegal tactics, the war crimes that Putin is committing in Ukraine. And it reminds us that we must redouble our determination to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Yeah. On the question of air defence, I'll come on to that later, but he's quite right. He and I were both told when we were out in Kyiv last month, it's President Zelensky's first priority, and he would have seen 2 weeks ago when I chaired the UDCG at NATO headquarters, I made a commitment that Britain was committing an extra £500 million package of air defence systems and missiles in order to meet that very urgent need that he and I both saw that day. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, President Putin postures as a strongman. He wants the world to believe that Russia has unstoppable momentum on the battlefield, that Ukrainians have no choice but to concede on his terms, and that we, as Ukraine's Western allies, have grown weary. Well, he's wrong, wrong, wrong. This was a war Putin thought he'd win in a week. But 4 years on, he's achieved none of his strategic aims. Instead, he's inflicted terrible suffering on his own people as well as Ukraine. He is failing. Now, of course, Ukrainian troops are certainly under pressure on the front line. But Russia has now been fighting in Ukraine for longer than the Soviet Union fought Germany during the Second World War. Its forces are advancing more slowly than those in the Battle of the Somme, and nearly 1.25 million Russians have been injured or killed. The average casualty rate of Russian troops is now 1,000 troops each day, every day. And the average life expectancy now of a conscript deployed to the Russian front line is less than 5 days. So Putin's desperate to avoid a second Russian mobilization, and because he's desperate, he's turning to more desperate measures to plug those gaps. Increasingly heavily reliant on foreign fighters. He's already called on 17,000 North Koreans fighting for him on his front line. And now he's preying on thousands of men from Latin America, Central Asia and Africa, sending them to their deaths on his front line. But Putin's war machine continues to be degraded. His war economy continues to be damaged. 40% of government spending is now on the military in Russia. Manufacturing is falling at its fastest rates. Oil revenues are plunging. Food prices are soaring. Make no mistake, Putin is under pressure. And he targets Ukrainian cities and civilians and energy supplies. And during this, the coldest winter for a decade, he's killed Ukrainian children in their beds, he's destroyed hospital wards, and he's plunged entire cities into darkness. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, for 2026, this government's mission, Britain's mission for Ukraine is simple. Support the fight today, secure the peace tomorrow, step up the pressure on Putin. I will, of course.
I don't know if President Putin follows these debates, but I'd like him to know that as far as the nation is concerned, the Secretary of State speaks for our entire nation. We're completely united on this. And can he also make clear that we're equally robust in not having any ceasefire on the basis that currently unoccupied territory is ceded? This would be an absolute disaster and simply encourage Putin to go further. But I just wanted to tell him that it's very important that our adversaries know that we are completely united in this House.
Secretary of State.
I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and as the Father of the House, he's able to speak for the House, he speaks for all sides of the House, and he speaks also for our nation as well. On supporting Ukraine's fight today, this year we've spent the highest level ever on military assistance. And 2 weeks ago I convened and chaired that 33rd meeting of the 50-nation-strong Ukraine Contact Defence Group, alongside German Defence Minister Boris Pistorius. We worked to make this meeting a big UDCG with big commitments for 2026. So for the UK's part, I announced a new £500 million package of urgent air defence support, as I said to the Honourable Gentleman, President Zelensky's top priority.
Am I right to honourable friend give way?
I will in a moment. And in total, this UDCG raised nearly $40 billion in new pledges of aid for Ukraine. Ukrainians there called it the best UDCG yet. And it also sent a clear message to Moscow. We are more united and we are more determined than ever to support Ukraine. I give way to my honourable friend.
I thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my honourable friend for giving way. He has been a steadfast champion for this country's support for Ukraine alongside his predecessors. This country is indeed united. But would he also pay tribute to those in our defence industry, including in my constituency Stevenage, that have been manufacturing the Storm Shadow missiles that have been used on the front lines of Kiev, in Ukraine, and all other support that they will give in the future?
Secretary of State.
I will indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. We're proud of our British defence industry. It equips our armed forces. It has helped equip the Ukrainians. It has helped provide the essential aid to keep the Ukrainians in the fight for the last 4 years. And his constituents that work at MBDA in Stevenage are playing a really important part of that. Ukraine tells us, reminds us of a deep lesson that we'd overlooked for too long, which is that when a country is forced to fight or faced with conflict, its armed forces are only as strong as the industry that stands behind them. And we have great pride on all sides of the House with what the great innovation and British industry and the workers in it are able to do. I will. I'll give way to him.
The honourable member's mention of Storm Shadow reminds me of the fact that, particularly in the early days of the conflict, there was resistance, often from the other side of the Atlantic, to supplying Ukraine with some of the longer-range missile systems that are necessary really to inflict pain on Russia in its centre. Now that President Trump's contribution has been reduced to supplying weapons which the Europeans have to pay for before they can go to Ukraine, do we have greater freedom to supply longer range, more effective weapons to Ukraine, or are we still somewhat beholden to the wishes of people on the other side of the Atlantic?
Secretary of State.
The principle on which we have donated British-made weapons to Ukraine has been consistently for the defence of Ukraine, and that's how Ukraine have been using them and using them effectively. Madam Deputy Speaker, on security... I give with Major Honour Friend.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I thank the Secretary of State, and I would like to offer my wholehearted support to him and appreciate the tone of his speech. Would he like to say a little bit more about the valuable work that's underway in some of our tech industry at the moment working on defence technology, and perhaps say a little bit more about the way in which he's modernising procurement to encourage those vital companies to come forward?
Secretary of State.
Well, my honourable friend has, I know, some advanced defence tech industry firms in his patch. And we have some aspects of what we can do in this country which are valuable to Ukraine. I'll come on to a particular joint programme we've got with Ukraine in a moment. But I have also to say to my honourable friends, the Ukrainians are the most creative, the most combat experienced defence industry and armed forces in the world at present. And we also have a great deal to learn. It's important that we're able to welcome Ukrainian firms that wish to set up new factories, new plants in this United Kingdom. And I know the Shadow Defence Secretary welcomes just such a Ukrainian company into his constituency, as I do, set I hope to open this week. I will, of course.
On the subject of tech, the Defence Secretary may be aware of NP Aerospace of Coventry, which, among other things, manufactures body armour. And the MOD, as the Secretary of State would be aware, is at the moment purchasing body armour that is fitted to the female form, but not for the British Army, but for Ukraine, which is perfectly fine. But would he ensure that the British Army too puts out a statement of requirement for body armour for women, since it would be inappropriate if in some point in the future British service women found themselves serving side by side with Ukrainian service women having this high-tech body armour, but our own service women will not. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I have to declare an interest as the father of two service women.
Secretary of State.
Can I pay tribute to the honourable gentleman's two daughters serving this country, first of all. Say, secondly, I hope he got to that Coventry firm's exhibition in this house yesterday to visit and see for himself what they produce. Third, I would say, I hope he, and I think he does by his intervention, agree that first and foremost our duty is to support Ukraine, but I am very conscious of the broader point that he makes. We procure for Ukraine, we learn lessons, and we need to make sure that our own forces are equally well equipped for the future. Just checking on any further interventions at this stage. I'll give way to him. Madam Deputy Speaker, on securing the peace for tomorrow, we all welcome the US leading the push for peace, and no one welcomes those efforts more than Ukraine. And when the peace comes, which we all hope to see this year, Britain will be ready to help secure that peace for the long term. And I'm proud to serve in a British cabinet under a Prime Minister that was the very first world leader to commit troops on the ground in Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. And following the Paris summit that he co-chaired last month, the work of the coalition in the willing is more advanced now than ever. He yesterday chaired a meeting of 36 coalition leaders. They confirm Ukraine can go into 2026 confident in the knowledge that when the war ends, it will have security guarantees, it will have a big prosperity agreement and a path to EU membership. And the coalition of the willing's multinational force for Ukraine will deploy. It will deploy when peace is agreed to secure Ukraine's skies and seas and regenerate its armed forces for the future. Both the British Army and the Royal Air Force are now conducting exercises in preparation, and I've accelerated £200 million already to ensure our forces have the kit they need to deploy. I will.
Could the Defence Secretary just assure this House when we will see the structure of the British component of multinational force Ukraine so that we can properly scrutinise how that force structure will look?
Secretary of State.
So the detail of the structure and the deployment will become clear and will depend on the context and detail of the peace agreement. The Prime Minister has said that in the context of a decision to deploy, this House will have the chance to debate and vote on that deployment, and it'll be, I suspect, at that point that we'll be able to set out that detail. He and other experts in this House will have the chance to examine that, debate that, and I trust give it their approval so that any British forces would be deployed into Ukraine in the context of a peace deal with all-party support. Madam Deputy Speaker, there is no more serious a decision for any Defence Secretary or any government than committing our armed forces on operations. But I want to be the Defence Secretary who deploys British troops to Ukraine, because that means that we will have a negotiated peace and that this war will finally be over.
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Britain has been united for Ukraine from day one. This House, as the father of the House has said, has been united for Ukraine from day one. I will indeed.
I
thank my right honourable friend for giving way. The exhibition in the upper waiting hall this week is called Voices from Ukraine, and it is a collaboration between my constituent sculptor Stephen Duncan and celebrated Ukrainian sculptors Oles Sidoruk, who is serving at the front line in Ukraine, and Boris Krylov. It is an extremely moving set of meditations on both the horror of the conflict and the resilience of Ukrainian people and their identity, which Putin is so viciously seeking to erase. Will the Secretary of State join me in paying tribute to these talented and courageous artists, in recognising the value of the arts and culture in how societies come to terms with difficult conflicts and trauma, and in encouraging all members across this House to go and view this important work this week?
Secretary of State.
My honourable friend is to be applauded for having sponsored this exhibition. I'm delighted that she's been able to tell the House about it this afternoon. I certainly pay tribute to her and to the artists for what they are doing and the way that they are conveying the experience of their countrymen and women to wider audiences. I'll go one better, because this debate is starting rather earlier than we might have expected, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will join her at the exhibition before it finishes at 5 o'clock this afternoon, and I would encourage all other honourable members from all sides to do the same. Yeah. Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm glad my honourable friend has raised this wider question, because I speak as Defence Secretary, but I speak also with pride about the warmth and the welcome and the solidarity of the British people. Because 4 years ago, British people started to open their homes to Ukrainians. and Britain welcomed 170,000 Ukrainians into our own homes. Many are still with those same families. And community, charity, faith, trade union groups have all raised funds or collected supplies and often driven those supplies out to Ukraine. Our defence industrial links, which several honourable members from all sides have raised this afternoon, continue to deepen, and we will soon start to jointly produce in the UK the new Ukrainian Octopus interceptor drones. The government has I will one more time for now.
John Mill.
I thank the Secretary of State for giving way. And a number of members have drawn attention to manufacturers in their constituencies, and I'd like to pay tribute to Chess Dynamics and my own constituency of Horsham, who build world-leading tracking devices and design them, absolutely state-of-the-art. But I also wanted to say I was also in Ukraine last year, and I was absolutely struck by the commitment and solidarity of the Ukrainian people behind the war, as well as our support, despite comments to the contrary. Would the Minister agree that, ironically, what Putin has achieved in trying to destroy Ukraine is in building an absolutely fantastic new national identity?
Secretary of State.
The honourable gentleman, first of all, is right about some of those outstanding firms in his Horsham constituency. Secondly, he's entirely right about the impact that Putin has had on Ukraine. Not building a new sense of national identity, because it was strong before his invasion. As I said, they had suffered occupation from Russian forces, and they have done for 12 years fighting against that. What it has done has deeply strengthened that identity, deeply strengthened that determination that they will remain a sovereign nation in future. And whatever briefings Putin is getting in the Kremlin, he's being misled to think that he is winning. He is failing, and it is our job with other allies to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes. Madam Deputy Speaker, part of that is the military aid that this country has been providing to Ukraine, but it's action on other fronts as well. And the government's frozen now nearly 30 billion of Russian assets in the UK, imposed over 3,000 sanctions on Russian individuals, organisations and ships, including a package of 300 new sanctions announced yesterday by my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary. We know that Russia's vast shadow fleet bankrolls much of Putin's illegal war in Ukraine, and sanctions against it by the UK and our partners have already forced around 200 ships to anchor out of use. We've seen the impact on Russian oil reserves. It fell by a quarter last year. But we need to do more. We need to shift up a gear, and our military is playing a greater role. And that work has begun. The UK has already supported both the US and France to conduct maritime interceptions. And at the Munich Security Conference, I chaired a meeting of the Jeff nations. Defence ministers brought together to discuss conducting further operations against shadow shipping vessels. Today I can confirm the MOD is leading now a new joint operational task force to advance plans on this issue. Madam Deputy Speaker, after 4 years, weariness with the war would be understandable, but in Britain our solidarity endures. It's a solidarity grounded both in the deep respect for Ukrainian courage and in clear recognition that the defence of Europe starts in Ukraine. The British people understand the cost of conflict always outweighs the price of preventing war. We remember that 4 years ago, Putin's invasion sent inflation into double digits, and our energy prices are still 40% higher, our food prices still 30% higher, as we all daily pay the price of this war. And the British people also know that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, he will not stop in Ukraine. And they see the Ukrainians fighting for the same values that we in Britain have done in past generations. The right of a free people to decide their own country's future. And so, like the leader of the House, the father of the House. I'm proud that Britain remains united for Ukraine. I'm proud that President Zelensky calls us one of his very closest allies. And I'm proud of the UK leadership on Ukraine, started under the previous government, stepped up further under ours. So let me end where I began, by paying tribute to the people of Ukraine. 4 years ago, we all remember, those expert commentators were largely in agreement. Kyiv would be captured, Zelensky would flee, Ukrainian command would collapse, and a pro-Russian regime would be installed while the world watched on. And if this war has taught us anything, it is never to underestimate the will of the Ukrainian people. They remain outnumbered, they remain outmatched in every domain, and yet they've recently retaken territory. They continue to strike deep into Russia, and in some parts of the front line, over 25 Russians have been killed for every Ukrainian life lost. So after 4 years of this brutal Russian aggression, 4 years of unbreakable Ukrainian courage, 4 years of enduring solidarity with those who stand with them, this must be the year peace is agreed. And our promise, our UK promise to Ukraine is this: we will keep up the pressure on Putin, we will stand by and support the Ukrainian armed forces, and when peace comes, we will help secure it, and we will ensure that it lasts.
The question is that this House has considered the situation in Ukraine. Shadow Minister Wendy Morton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a critical time for Ukraine, and as we mark the 4th anniversary of this war, the UK must continue to proudly stand shoulder to shoulder with our Ukrainian friends. 4 years on from Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, we all think of the innocent lives caught up in this terrible conflict, the innocent civilians, the families of brave servicemen and women, the Ukrainian children forcibly deported to Russia, all those who suffer life-changing injuries and those who have lost their homes. At the start of this conflict, the then Conservative government, led by Boris Johnson, with cross-party support in this House, rallied the world behind Ukraine. We supplied weapons, we provided humanitarian aid, we championed their cause, and we opened our homes to those fleeing Putin's brutality. We must never forget that this war was started by Vladimir Putin, supported by an axis of authoritarian states seeking to extinguish democracy on our continent. Russia's increasing reliance on Iranian drones and weaponry underlines that this conflict is no longer confined to one border. It is part of a wider alignment of regimes determined to undermine the rules-based international order. And we must remain united in defending shared values and the principle that aggressors should never succeed. It is crucial that there is a clear, united front in support of Ukraine. Recent Russian attacks, including those on Kyiv, which last year also damaged a British council building, underline why the UK and our allies must urgently deliver the military support that Ukraine needs. Putin still aims to subjugate Ukraine. The Euro-Atlantic alliance must ensure he fears the consequences. And Russia's response to recent ceasefire proposals shows why the West must remain resolute. Britain and our allies must continue maximum pressure on the Kremlin while supporting Ukraine on the battlefield. As always, it's ultimately for Ukraine, as a proud and sovereign nation, to decide its own future. Any settlement must secure justice and lasting peace for its people. Territorial concessions would reward aggression. Putin has shown repeatedly he's not serious about peace, and Britain must lead the way on sanctions and on international pressure. I'm very fortunate I had the privilege of visiting Ukraine twice, first in 2021 during my time as a Foreign Minister, and again in 2023 with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy. And I look forward to returning again soon. And I'm very conscious, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there are not just front bench colleagues, but many colleagues from across this House and the other place who travel to Ukraine. And it is such a strong and clear symbol of our unwavering support. For me personally, each visit has left a really deep and lasting impression on me. In 2021, I remember standing alongside Ukrainian leaders at the launch of the Crimea platform, reaffirming the UK's unwavering commitment to Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. When I returned, though, in 2023, what a different country it was. A country that was living under the daily realities of war. I met parliamentarians, civil society leaders and local officials, many of whom had lost their loved ones. Yet their resolve was and still is undiminished. That spirit, defiant, democratic and determined, must guide us here in our response. But one of the gravest crimes committed during this war is the abduction and forcible deportation of Ukrainian children, something that I know both sides of this House take incredibly seriously. Thousands of children have been taken from their families and communities and transferred into Russia or Russian-occupied territory, stripped of their identity, subjected to so-called re-education, and in many cases illegally adopted. This is not an unintended consequence of war. It is a deliberate policy designed to erase Ukraine's future. The International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants in response to these crimes, but words and warrants alone are not enough. So I do hope, in summing up, the Minister may be able to set out what concrete steps the government is taking with allies and international partners to secure the return of these children and to ensure that those responsible are pursued without delay or hesitation. Of course I will.
State.
I am really impressed and pleased that she has laid such a stress on Putin's abduction of Ukrainian children, his attempt to brainwash them, and that sentiment has strong support on both sides, which he recognised. That my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, is in Ukraine at the moment and has just been presented with the Ukrainian Order of Merit for her work on exactly this concern.
If I'm really honest, Madam Deputy Speaker, I didn't appreciate that she just was in receipt of that award and recognition. But I think it's absolutely fitting. And to those people who sat outside this place who say we do nothing and they badmouth us, it absolutely demonstrates that there are so many good people in this place. And so she rightly deserves that honour. Yeah. And equally, I know there are many other people, colleagues in this place, who are very, very committed to Ukraine. And I think a number of them are either in Ukraine at the moment, on their way back, maybe even some of them are heading to this chamber later. Only time will tell. But I'm really pleased that he made that intervention. It's very unusual that the Shadow Minister takes or is even offered an intervention from the Secretary of State. But it was really, really important that we recognise that. Starting under the last Conservative government, the UK's support has been world-leading. £3 billion per year in military aid since 2024. 12 billion including humanitarian assistance and advanced weapons from Storm Shadow missiles to Challenger 2 tanks. And Operation Interflex has trained over 50,000 Ukrainian recruits on British soil. We hosted the 2023 Ukraine Recovery Conference, raising over $60 billion towards reconstruction. And the 100-year partnership, negotiations for which commenced under the Conservative government, demonstrates our shared commitment to enduring cooperation across trade, security, education, science and culture. Madam Deputy Speaker, we know that sanctions work. We also know that Russia's economy is under severe strain, and that pressure must continue. This includes targeted pressure on refineries in China, Turkey and India who are buying Russian oil. Mobilising frozen Russian sovereign assets to support Ukraine's war effort is crucial. The £2.26 billion UK loan from immobilised Russian assets is welcome, but more must be done and needs to be done immediately. So, will the Minister tell the House what further progress has been made to unlock additional Russian assets and why more decisive action has not yet been taken? The UK should lead innovative legal solutions with our allies and the City of London to make more resources available to Ukraine right now. Like us, the United States has been deeply invested in this conflict. American security is tied to Ukraine's survival, and US military support has been indispensable. So I would like to ask the Minister if he can confirm how the government are ensuring close coordination with the US and other NATO allies on military aid, sanctions and strategic support.
On the US, right
yes, of course.
Thank my honourable friend very much for allowing me to intervene. It appears that we are being teed up for some sort of deployment to Ukraine at some point in the future. Does my right honourable friend recall that in a similar debate to this on the 3rd of March, the Prime Minister said that he was working with the US in order to provide, quote, security guarantees that are worthy of the name, that is, one that has a forward-leaning European element, but a US backdrop and a US backing. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that it would be utter folly to deploy British troops without those US guarantees?
Wendy Morton.
My right honourable friend speaks with not just eloquence in this place, but so much experience. And I think we should all so often listen to some of the colleagues who bring that expertise and knowledge to this place. So I absolutely do agree with him. I think it would be madness not to. And I think it just further demonstrates the importance of working really closely with our allies as we continue to support Ukraine in their endeavours and in their fight. And when it comes to confrontation, we must also confront the growing threat posed by Russia's so-called shadow fleet. I know the Secretary of State mentioned in his speech. These vessels are not only a sanctions loophole, but they are a direct security to our own shores as well, and to those of our allies. Reports of ship-to-ship transfers, insurance evasion, and deceptive practices are deeply concerning. If Russia can bypass the oil price cap through this illicit network, then the effectiveness of our sanctions regime is undermined. So I hope that later today the Minister may be able to outline what further action the government is taking alongside partners in the G7 and NATO to crack down on this shadow fleet, to tighten enforcement in UK waters and financial markets, and to ensure that British insurers, ports and service providers are not inadvertently enabling sanctions evasion. So, as we mark the 4th anniversary of this brutal invasion, our task is clear. Provide Ukraine with the tools to defend itself, maintain crippling pressure on Putin, and ensure peace is built on justice, not on concessions. Ukraine's fight is our fight. If we stand firm, we strengthen our own security. If we hesitate, we embolden the aggressors everywhere. This House will, I am in no doubt, speak with clarity this afternoon. The test for the government, though, is whether their actions now will match the scale of the words. And I really hope the Minister will give us that assurance this afternoon. Because Britain's support is not symbolic. It's concrete. Military aid, humanitarian help, sanctions enforcement and diplomatic leadership. We must continue to lead with purpose. Ukraine's struggle is our struggle, and we will stand with them until victory is secured on Ukraine's terms. Thank you.
Mary Rimmer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I first of all pay tribute to the Secretary of State for his excellent opening to this debate today. It gives it all the details. And I pay tribute to our opposition now, but not on this. There's one thing that has been secure. I'm so proud that we've all stuck together right the way through, and just nothing that says. And we support. It's not symbolic. We know it's not symbolic. We do what we do because we love those people and we love Ukraine. And as I said at the beginning of all this, Ukraine was fighting our war. Because if it gets through Ukraine, it's Europe, and then we'll be there. But on this solemn debate, we remember all those whose lives have been shattered by war. Yesterday marked 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. a brutal escalation of a conflict that has brought immense suffering to millions and continues to threaten the foundations of international law and human dignity. And according to some, the start of World War III. Yesterday, I met Irina Dovgin, a Ukrainian woman whose quiet courage speaks louder than any statistic. During Russia's 2014 invasion of Crimea, she was detained, brutally abused, and ultimately forced to flee her home in Donetsk. Years later, she has finally received reparations, only just now, able to support and transform her life, enabling her to access vital medical treatment and begin rebuilding what was taken from her. Yet her case is the exception, not the rule. And she begged of us last night to ensure reparations get to those women and children who've been so terribly, terribly abused, and not to wait for years. Thousands of Ukrainians have endured similar horrors, first in 2014 and again since the full-scale invasion began 4 years ago. Since 24th of February 2022, communities across Ukraine have been scarred by violence, homes destroyed, families separated, civilians subjected to torture, sexual violence and unlawful detention. Towns once full of life have been reduced to rubble. Children have been uprooted from their families and taken across the borders. Speaking Russian now, and it's just horrendous what's going on. But some have been rescued. There is people working on it. The human cost is staggering, not only in lives lost, but in futures stolen. People in my constituency, and I'm sure in all of your constituencies, there will be people from churches, veterans groups, banding together to do their bit for Ukraine. For example, No Duff in UK, a veteran-led organisation deploying volunteers teams to deliver humanitarian aid on the ground. Their work truly demonstrates the love that we have for our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Our government also demonstrates ironclad support for Ukraine. Our Parliament, not just government. Only yesterday, the government announced a significant new package of 300 new sanctions aimed at cutting off the Kremlin's revenue and weakening its capacity to wage this illegal war, including measures targeting Russia's energy sector and key oil infrastructure. These steps are welcome, but sanctions must be adequately enforced, coordinated and relentless. And if they are not effective, they do not deter aggression, they embolden it. Yet the UK lacks a clear strategy for ensuring that frozen Russian assets serve this purpose. And I'm pleased with the debate today, what's been said. Britons can remain immobilised for years, losing value while suffers wait without support. Work like England spoke of last night. Working with our European partners, we should move decisively to seize and repurpose Russian frozen assets, including up to £30 billion held in the UK, and direct them towards humanitarian, financial and military support for Ukraine. We must ensure that UK-held funds linked to sanctioned individuals, including proceeds from the sale of Chelsea Football Club and recovered assets from oligarch Patrick Evan, are released swiftly and directly towards Ukrainian survivors. We must ensure Ukraine and people receive justice. If we are serious, again, about justice, and I know we are, we've got to make sure that our actions deliver justice and our word is kept, and we deliver justice and peace for those people who we all are so proud of and we all owe so much to, and I'm sure they appreciate it.
Yeah. Liberal Democrat spokesperson James MacCleary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 4 years ago yesterday, Vladimir Putin launched his deadly full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, 4 years on, we face a solemn reminder of the death and destruction that has ensued. An estimated 1.8 million soldiers have been killed, wounded or gone missing on both sides, including up to 325,000 Russian troops and as many as 140,000 Ukrainians killed. The United Nations has recorded at least 15,000 civilian deaths and more than 40,000 injured, including at least 763 children, though even the United Nations says the toll is likely much higher. That's why the Liberal Democrats are absolutely clear in their support. In the face of Putin's aggression and Donald Trump's unreliability, Europe must send an unambiguous signal. National sovereignty is not negotiable, and we will not stand idly by. We will not accept that might is right, and we will not allow Ukraine to be sacrificed at the altar of appeasement. We all want to see peace and a just and lasting settlement, but we must be clear that Vladimir Putin has no interest in peace. He remains hell-bent on the subjugation of Ukraine. While we welcome diplomatic efforts, we remain deeply concerned about the specifics of any American security guarantees. The unfortunate truth is that President Trump is unreliable, unpredictable, and, to be frank, disdainful of the rule of law. And this means that Europe must step up. The UK and France have committed to a potential military deployment to Ukraine, should a peace deal be agreed. Liberal Democrats support this commitment in principle. However, Parliament must have a vote on any deployment of UK personnel, and I've welcomed the Prime Minister's very clear statement on that. Democratic oversight is absolutely essential. The government must also be transparent about timescales and ensure our armed forces actually have the resources to support such a mission. It's great to hear from the Secretary of State today about the £200 million worth of funding that he has accelerated for that purpose. And crucially, we have to have clarity at the right time about what the terms of engagement would be for those forces even when that deployment takes place. Because supporting Ukraine long-term isn't just about political will, it's about practical capability too. Any peace settlement must focus on defending Ukraine, strengthening deterrence, and creating sustainable conditions for a lasting peace. It cannot be a deal that effectively rewards Russian aggression. The UK must ensure Ukraine's interests remain at the heart of negotiations, not Putin's territorial ambitions or Donald Trump's desire for a grubby carve-up. It must remain absolutely focused on cutting off the resources that fuel Putin's war machine. Too many of those who comment on this conflict fail to fully understand its historical and cultural context. To speak of it as a conflict that Putin will just stop on fair terms is a failure to grasp the fact that his war in Ukraine is central now to sustaining his mafia state and his role as its kingpin. To speak of major territorial contentions for Ukraine is to ask them to give in to a bullying neighbour that has spent not 12 years, but in fact hundreds of years, repeatedly attempting to control them and deny their right to exist as a nation. Any agreement requires a deep understanding of these countries that has been entirely absent from the rhetoric in the United States and is also too often absent in commentators in this country. We are keen to support practical steps taken by our government, and the decision to ban UK maritime services for Russian LNG was particularly welcome. We've been calling this for some months, and it's great to see that it's finally come to fruition, but implementation has been quite slow. Since 2022, UK-owned or insured LNG carriers have transported £45 billion worth of Russian products. No British money should be supporting Russia's war. The government must move at pace to enforce the ban, and it must go further, and I would welcome any updates from ministers on that today. We have also called for the oil price cap to be lowered to $30 per barrel, with stricter enforcement. Madam Deputy Speaker, we must also confront the reality that Russia is actively circumventing sanctions through third countries. Georgia has been increasingly used as a backdoor route for sanctioned goods and financial flows into Russia's economy, undermining the pressure that we and our allies are trying to apply. The UK should be prepared to sanction those facilitating that evasion, starting with Bidzina Ivanishvili, Georgia's oligarchic de facto leader, whose influence has steered the country away from its Euro-Atlantic path and toward Moscow's orbit. We must also proscribe Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps in full. The IRGC is not only destabilising the Middle East, it is also directly supporting Putin's war machine, including through the provision and production of drones used to terrorise Ukrainian cities. It was also revealed to MPs on the Defence Select Committee that, quote, Russia can only maintain this war because China is bankrolling it, with some sources suggesting up to 60% of funding is coming from China. The government must increase pressure on Beijing to stop funding Putin's deadly war. Then there's the £2.5 billion from Roman Abramovich's sale of Chelsea Football Club. money that should have helped suffering Ukrainian civilians over a year ago, money that could have supported efforts to rescue at least some of the 20,000 children abducted by Russian forces. Liberal Democrats called urgently for these funds to be delivered. It's welcome the government is now threatening legal action, but it shouldn't have taken this long. It also seems that everyone now agrees that we must urgently unlock frozen Russian assets. The UK has frozen £30 billion worth under our sanctions regime, £30 billion sitting idle in British bank accounts, while Ukraine desperately needs $120 billion next year alone to resist Russia. So what exactly is blocking this? The legal framework exists, the political will, apparently so far, is lacking. The Prime Minister must personally step in and drive this forward, because at this rate we're watching Ukraine's defences stretch to breaking point whilst we sit on the very resources that could be helping them. They are fighting for us. The least we can do is unlock the money to help them win. My honourable friend, the member for Bicester and Woodstock, has introduced a bill to seize these frozen assets and direct the proceeds to Ukraine's defence and reconstruction. Putin must be punished, not rewarded. A government report recently also showed that UK imports from Russia had reached £1.7 billion by June last year, up 21% on the previous year. Perhaps ministers can tell us what steps the government is taking to restrict this profitable trade for the Kremlin. The international community, including this and the previous government, have rightly condemned Russia on the international stage. Through its illegal invasion, cyber attacks, energy coercion and interference in democratic processes, the Kremlin has demonstrated consistent disregard for international law. The UK government must maintain an unequivocal position opposing Russia's readmission to the G7 and work with allies to ensure this stance is upheld across all multilateral bodies. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to return to the human cost. Over 20,000 Ukrainian children have been abducted since the full-scale invasion began. As a parent with 2 small children at home, I find it very hard not to put myself in the place of those Ukrainian families, torn apart by concern for their missing children cruelly snatched away as part of Putin's wider agenda to extinguish Ukrainian culture and identity. These mass abductions constitute war crimes and crimes against humanity, and any update from ministers on what we are doing to help recover those children will be very welcome. And I also would really like to welcome the award given to the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South. She has been a dogged campaigner on this issue, and I cannot imagine anybody more worthy of that sort of recognition. President Putin must be held accountable, and the outstanding International Criminal Court arrest warrant against him must be implemented. This country and the government must pick up the mantle of tracking down and rescuing those children to bring them home to their families where they belong. Reports from Russia paint a sobering picture of what 4 years of war has meant. For Russia, this has meant fundamentally deformed economy, legal system and society. Courts clear soldiers of murder and rape because they have signed military contracts. Recruiting has become desperately difficult despite enormous spending. An entire generation of young Russian men has been wiped out by this war to fulfill Putin's ambitions. For Ukraine, these 4 years have meant something else entirely. It has meant extraordinary courage in the face of impossible odds. It has meant soldiers who began fighting in muddy trenches with artillery now finding themselves in a war dominated by drones, a conflict that has evolved faster than anyone imagined. It has meant watching Russia systematically destroy the very things that keep people alive through the winter. Just last month, Russian missiles tore through power stations across the country. Hundreds of thousands of people in Dnipropetrovsk and Zaporizhia woke up to find themselves without electricity and without heating, as temperatures dropped to minus 20 degrees Celsius. This is the coldest winter Ukraine has seen in a decade, and Putin's strategy is clear. If his army cannot break Ukraine's will, he will try to freeze its people in submission. Because of the courage of the Ukrainian people, and I'm very proud to say, the support of allies like Britain, Russia no longer risks conquering Kiev. Ukraine pushed back Russians back in Kharkiv and in Kherson. Against an adversary with much greater resources, Russia has stayed on the front line. Madam Deputy Speaker, Ukraine should not have to face Putin's aggression alone. Britain must continue to lead in Europe, standing shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, not just words but in deeds, with enforceable security guarantees, not empty promises. It means cutting off Putin's revenue streams completely. It means seizing frozen assets. It means democratic oversight of troop deployments. It means ensuring Ukraine's territorial integrity is non-negotiable in any peace settlement. And it means doing everything we can possibly do to get those stolen children back to their families. 4 years on, the protection of Ukraine's sovereignty must remain central to Britain's priorities. Because if we fail Ukraine, we fail the international order, and if we fail the international order, we invite aggression everywhere.
Frank McNally.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this afternoon's debate, and I wholly welcome the remarks made by my right honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, and members from across the House, including the Liberal Democrat spokesperson and the Shadow Minister. It is a debate we would rather not be having, but the actions of the Kremlin have led us to this place and to the untold death, injury, suffering and displacement of millions of Ukrainians, up to 2 million people killed, injured or missing on both sides, 3.7 million Ukrainians displaced internally, and close to 6 million refugees, men, women, children ripped from their homes, their work, their schools, their families, their very way of life, all at the hands of a Russian aggressor whose intransigence towards this conflict means it will continue into its 5th year, despite the catastrophic losses the Russians themselves have experienced. No doubt the invasion of Ukraine was a defining moment of our time. In many ways, it was inevitable, however, given Putin's rhetoric and actions over the last 25 years. But the arrogance and the hubris of Russia also resulted in a vast overestimation of its might and a failure to account for the gallantry of the Ukrainian forces, as well as the robust leadership of President Zelensky and the stout resistance and resilience of the civilian population. Far from taking Kyiv in 2 weeks, Putin resorts to terrorising the citizens of Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities from a distance with frequent deadly air raids. So the comments made earlier and the actions of the government are to be welcomed with regards to air defence. Now, there are so many enduring and stark images from this conflict, but there are two that stand out to me. The first being the evacuations on the platforms of Lviv railway station, Ukrainians forced to flee for their lives, never knowing if they would return. A significant contingent, almost 400 in fact, made passage to North Lanarkshire, many of whom still reside in the High Coats area of Coatbridge in my constituency, joining a long legacy, Madam Deputy Speaker, over the years of successful settlement in North Lanarkshire of people fleeing crisis and dangers from across the globe. I will give way to my friend.
Deputy Speaker, perhaps he's able to say something about the very important work of Ukrainian community centres around Great Britain and Northern Ireland. In my own community, they've been absolutely stalwart in supporting their colleagues back in Ukraine, sending aid and raising funds, and also maintaining Ukrainian culture through having Ukrainian language libraries and other facilities that have kept families in touch with their own culture while they live in Britain.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And my honourable friend is absolutely right, and I'm just about to touch on some of that, but we have seen that in the High Coats area of Coatbridge, and the way in which the Ukrainian community is supporting those who are fighting on the front line is absolutely admirable. But just to add to what my honourable friend was mentioning there, in Coatbridge, the Ukrainian population have celebrated now their national holiday. They've organised kids clubs, formed a tenants association and walking groups. They are now a flourishing community of Ukrainians who are celebrating their own culture and thinking about how they can contribute and what they can offer to the wider community. That open celebration of their culture by Ukrainians in Coatbridge stands in stark contrast, sadly, to the experience of Ukrainians thousands of miles away in Ukraine, where the occupied forces of Russia have sought to erase that culture and identity in the territories that have been devastated by Russian forces over the last 4 years, by the boundless terror, kidnap and murder that we have seen, and the monstrous stealing and indoctrination of thousands of children, as has been mentioned. And the first person, Madam Deputy Speaker, to highlight the scale of this to me was my honourable friend, the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, who at this moment in time, as the Defence Secretary highlighted, is in Ukraine, receiving the Order of Merit, and deservedly so. The other defining image, Madam Deputy Speaker, I recall from the early days of the war, followed the liberation of Bucha, particularly when President Zelensky walked through what had been left after the brutal massacre and war crimes that had been perpetrated by Russian forces, of which there must be full accountability. But despite Bucha or Mykolaiv or Mariupol or Kharkiv, the Ukrainians fight on. It is, of course, vital for our own security and our moral obligation that we continue to have their back, and I greatly welcome the actions on defence spending that has been taken across the UK by this government, and it's important that we build on it. For Scotland, defence spending is worth £2 billion a year. It's supporting 12,000 jobs from the Clyde to Rosyth to Coatbridge and Bellshill and across the country. In addition to the strongest possible sanctions, we must also continue to support those Ukrainians who have settled here and have built a life here over the course of the last 4 years. For many, while not by choice, our communities have become their home, and we must always keep that at the forefront of our minds. However long this war has left to run, we must remain resolute in our support for Ukraine, to support them in finding a just peace that satisfies their terms and ensures that the depredations of Putin's regime are ended in Ukraine and never visited upon anywhere else in Europe.
Sir Roger Gale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I first join with my right honourable friend, the Father of the House, in thanking the Secretary of State for Defence for the power of his words and for the manner in which he has spoken for the Parliament of the United Kingdom, not just for the government. I don't think there's a member in the House that would quarrel with anything that he said. And the message that has to go out from here is that we are and we stand united with Ukraine. There is a danger. In 2014, the Russians annexed Ukraine, Crimea. And at that time, they were members of the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. They were compelled to withdraw. In 2018, that Parliamentary Assembly, of which the Father of the House and I were both members at the time, voted almost overwhelmingly to readmit the Russian Federation to the Parliamentary Assembly. The Baltic states, Georgia, Moldova, and the United Kingdom fought that through the night, literally, in an unprecedented display of parliamentary unity. But we lost. We were beaten hands down. The following day, the Russian delegation was back in the hemicycle in Strasbourg. I don't think it is stretching it too far to say that the message that we sent out was profoundly wrong and almost certainly influenced the decision by Putin to believe that he could probably invade Ukraine with impunity. It's been said over and over again, and absolutely rightly, that Ukraine is fighting for our democracy. If Putin was allowed to win, it would not stop there. It would be Georgia, it would be Moldova, and then possibly the Baltic states, Madam Deputy Speaker. And if that happens, then NATO becomes involved and you probably have got World War III. So the stakes are rather high. And it behoves all of us, I think, to stand as firmly as we can and to send out the message that for as long as it takes means for as long as it takes. I want to follow on from the remarks made by the Honourable Gentleman, the member for Coatbridge and Bellshill, and to concentrate a little bit of time on the diaspora, the expat Ukrainians living throughout Europe, and particularly in the United Kingdom. The Secretary of State said in his opening remarks that there were thousands, and there are, of Ukrainians yearning for the opportunity to return home. I'm sure that that is true. And he also went on to say that he hoped that there will be peace this year. And again, Madam Deputy Speaker, I don't suppose there's anybody in the House or beyond it, probably in the United Kingdom, who doesn't want the bloodshed to stop. Ukraine has already sacrificed the largest part of a generation of its finest young men and women in armed conflict, as well, of course, as all of those civilians who have suffered. And again, that includes those thousands of children that have been referred to many times now in this House, who've been abducted and are now being indoctrinated somewhere within the neo-Soviet Union. And they have to be repatriated. But the Father of the House made the point, I think absolutely rightly, that peace cannot mean peace at any price. If we are going to honour the dead that have sacrificed so much in Ukraine in fighting for their democracy and their country as well as for ours. So, while the Secretary of State was right to say there are thousands of Ukrainians yearning for the opportunity to return home, when that will actually be possible is a moot point. If there is a peace, and please God there will be soon, but if there is, and if it's on a sound basis, then there will still be a phenomenal amount of reconstruction in the centre and the east of Ukraine in particular that will have to be carried out before anybody has homes to return to. And depending upon the nature of the deal, there will be people who either will not be able to return home because it is still occupied, or their homes will have been so destroyed that physically there will be nowhere for them to go. Of course.
Very grateful to the Honourable Gentleman for giving way. He makes a very powerful point about the reconstruction that will follow the peace. One of those areas will be in terms of mine clearance. So I think it's estimated about a quarter of Ukrainian land is now mined, which means that Ukrainian farmers are literally farming on the front line. And we cannot underestimate how many decades it's going to take to clear those mines from that land. So can you join me in welcoming both the funding from the government to the Halo Trust for the work that's underway and also pay tribute to the Ukrainian farmers?
Yeah. Absolutely right, to both to pay tribute to the farmers and also to highlight the phenomenal difficulty in clearing mines. And the Healey Trust has experience in this around the world. And it's years, not months. So for all of those reasons, I want to say to honourable friend on the front bench opposite, the Minister, this is a sensitive issue, but there are scores of Ukrainians living in the United Kingdom now who regard the UK as home, because they have no choice. Madam Deputy Speaker, my wife and I have 5 young people that we now regard as grandchildren, 2 in one family and 3 in another. They range from teenage down to the cot. And last weekend, a young lady came into my surgery. She has young in my terms, she has a 16-year-old daughter who wants to go to college. And like so many other young Ukrainians of that sort of age, she's now between a rock and a hard place because she doesn't know how long she's going to be allowed to remain in the United Kingdom. There are others, professional people, who can't work here, would like to return home, but need to be enabled to establish a proper professional life in the United Kingdom. And I'll give the Minister one example. Dr. Elena Hubska, now a personal friend of ours, the mother of two of the children. Elena is a fully qualified dentist. She's got 16 years in practice as a hospital doctor. She's not allowed to practice by the General Dental Council, in spite of the fact that the country is crying out for dentists, and I'm told there are some 200 others like her with those qualifications. Now that is a nonsense. And Elena, every school holiday, returns to Kharkiv, where her mother is living in a bombed-out flat, so that she can treat children and frontline soldiers who otherwise can't get dental care. But she's not allowed to practice here. I don't want to put the Minister on the spot today, but what I would say to him is we have actually got to sort out the longer-term future for people who are not even regarded as refugees or classed as refugees. They are stateless. They have no actual status in this country. We've generously, initially, made them welcome, but we've now reached the point where we have to take some longer-term decisions. And I'd like the Minister to go back to his colleagues in the department, to the Secretary of State to take this to Cabinet, to say we really have got to recognise, however sensitive the immigration issue is, and I understand, of course I do, that it is, but however sensitive it is, there is a group of people living in this country, contributing to our way of life now, culturally, as has been said earlier, who have to be regularised. They must have a pathway to settlement so that the young people can go to school, can go to college, can qualify, can build lives here. President Zelensky wants his people to return home. We want them to be able to return home. But for the moment and for the foreseeable future, that is not possible. So please, Minister, take that message away and see what can be done, working with the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, to now regularise the position in the interests not just of them, but actually of the United Kingdom as well.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's an honour to speak in this debate, and I associate myself with the remarks of everyone who's spoken in the Chamber so far, not least in making the point that there continues to be cross-party support for resolute support behind Ukraine, and there is, I believe, still resolute support for the Ukrainian people from the British people. And I want to start by paying tribute to Ukrainians, as the honourable member who just spoke did, in our communities who have come over from Ukraine, including the Association for Ukrainians Great Britain Hemel Hempstead branch, who did a march through the town centre at the weekend to mark the anniversary, the 4th anniversary of the war, and continue to be and contribute outstandingly to our town. But I want to focus my remarks, if I may, on some specific points about an area of work that I'm trying to support colleagues with around increasing the amount of small vehicles and drones and supplies that are going out to help the Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military as well, and the work being done by a number of UK charities and individuals in this endeavour. I went out myself, as members of the House would have heard me say before, in the spring of 2024, driving with a convoy of vehicles with an Estonian-based charity, but with vehicles joining from the UK all the way through the Channel Tunnel, through Germany to the Polish border, I should say, and then overnight into Kyiv. And it was an incredible honour to be part of that, because I come myself from a humanitarian background. I've worked for charities including Oxfam in the past, and I support the need for the vital work that humanitarian aid organisations do day in, day out. But I've also always believed, back from when I first had the opportunity to go to Kosovo, that we should not be shy about the need for military support as well. And that's something that I felt I personally wanted to contribute by being part of this convoy. And the organisation Help 99 that does it is one of a number around Europe that contributes in this way. And some of them do deliver pure humanitarian aid too. Some of them are delivering fire trucks. Fire Aid is a brilliant organisation that is being supported by, I believe, a member opposite, Mr Blackman, forgive me, I forget his constituency. They're doing brilliant work. There's another organisation that is taking out former ambulances to be used out there as well. There's a number of organisations, including Pickups for Peace, UK4UA.org, Surrey Stands with Ukraine, and others. I won't list all of them, but I had the opportunity to invite a number of them to Parliament last year for an event we did, about 60 individuals representing 30 such organisations. And I want to pay tribute to the incredible work that they are doing day in, day out, and putting their own lives at risk to go not just to the Polish border, but as I said, into Ukraine, and often beyond Kyiv, but into the west of the country as well. And so there's a couple of points that I want to make about how we might be able to support these efforts more. First of all, what the UK government perhaps could be doing to supply more vehicles that are perhaps on the government estate but are reaching their end of life, that could be used with relatively little cost to the UK taxpayer. Now, I'll just take a moment to step back and say why these vehicles matter, because the 4.5 billion that we'll be providing this year alone is testament to the fact that we need hard power going into Ukraine. No one is arguing anything otherwise. But these small vehicles do have an important contribution to make. They help soldiers get from A to B with ease. They help to get supplies in. They often, some of them, have been turned into makeshift ambulances because, of course, the Russians would target anything that was white with a red cross on it. These are vital things that the soldiers also need, and there are vehicles, Land Rovers, that National Network Rail may own on their estate that could easily be written off and donated as well. And to that end, I've written to a number of government departments, including DEFRA, the Home Office, DESNES, and the Department of Transport, asking if these surplus and end-of-life vehicles could be donated. I've also argued that with the new powers that the police have to seize off-road vehicles driven in antisocial behaviour in an antisocial way in this country, instead of them being crushed, as satisfying as that is to a lot of us, I'm sure, could they actually be donated? You know, we have quad bikes, dirt bikes and scramblers that actually soldiers in the forests in Ukraine could find quite helpful. However, unfortunately, some of the responses I've had from the letters that I've sent in have shown that there is perhaps a need for a single accountable body that could coordinate this effort better. You know, I don't count the MOD in this regard. They've set out some of the excellent work they're already doing in this way, but maybe some of the other government departments could work better together to get some of these vehicles to be donated. And that does include Her Majesty's Treasury. You know, these are, as assets, public assets, there does need to be a decision to be made that we are going to write them off. And that is creating some of the bottlenecks and delays that I've encountered. And like I say, I do think that this is a relatively small cost to the taxpayer overall, so I would argue that it is worth doing. The second point that I want to make is regarding the support for the charities themselves. So I, ahead of this debate, sent a message around the group that I brought together last year to ask if they had specific suggestions that they'd like me to raise today. And so here's just a few. One is that came from the organisation Surrey Stands with Ukraine, is could there be some form of a list that enabled humanitarian charities in the UK to seek some sort of recognition or approval that they could then use to go in and ask for donations from the public or private sector. So, for example, you know, if there was some sort of list that said these organisations have a track record of delivering to Ukraine in an effective way, they might be able to get some form of letter that they could then take to their local NHS trust to say, we're a serious outfit, we've got the right intentions, we've got some approvals and checks. If you've got old ambulances that you don't need, can we have them? And that they could take to food companies or supermarkets to help speed up the donation of food for some of their humanitarian convoys and so on. Another point that they made is around the actual travel over the channel itself, whether it's on ferry or via the Channel Tunnel. I wonder whether or not there's some discussions that could be had with some of those private operators, the Channel Tunnel and the ferry companies by the government, to maybe encourage them to offer some kind of discount or even waive the fee of the cost of getting these vehicles over the channel, because that, when it adds up, you've got a convoy of about 20 different vehicles, is not an insignificant amount of money. Related to that, they've also asked if there can be more to be done to remove customs red tapes where they exist, with not just in terms of at the UK border, but all the way through to Ukraine. I myself have encountered this, a ridiculous amount of orders spent waiting at the Polish border because of a minor piece of paperwork that was missing, when really the Polish authorities should be doing much more to enable these vehicles to be driven over the border with much more ease. So I wonder if there's more we can do to have some of those discussions. The other thing is around, final point on this front, is around drone nets. So as we know, drones are a constant threat from the Russians. A number of organisations are bringing over old fishing nets. And on this point, I'd like to pay tribute in a cross-party way to the Scottish Government, who I think a few days ago announced that they would be donating upwards of 200,000 Scottish fishing nets. Small thing, but it helps protect some cities on the Western Front from incursions from Russian drones, and it may also, I've seen pictures of them over highways, just protect some of the convoys, the vehicles coming through from Russian drones. So those are some practical suggestions. As I said earlier, no one is suggesting, certainly not they, that these interventions alone are going to be enough to push the Russians back. In fact, it would be remiss of me not to say that they said almost the opposite. They did want me to make the point that as vital as their work is, it is incredibly important that we continue to provide the hard power and the military aid. And I'm proud that our government is doing that, but it is really a message to the whole of the West. And I do want to reference a point that the Right Honourable Member for New Forest East made about the need for long-range missiles as well. So on that note, I hope when the Minister gets a chance to wind up that he'll reflect on some of the points I would say. I would say as a final plea that the organisations themselves would love an opportunity to meet with the Minister or officials to discuss some of the challenges they're facing and practical ways we can help increase the support we're giving to Ukraine. Thank you.
And the Honourable Gentleman will have seen me reach for the book. The constituency name he was looking for was Harrow East. I thought it was West. Brian Mathew.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today we pause to reflect on the last 4 years since the full invasion of Ukraine, on the lives lost and forever changed. We mark not only the immense suffering caused, but also to reaffirm our solidarity with the Ukrainian people. In my constituency of Melksham and Devizes, and no doubt in many others across the country, solidarity has gone beyond words. Families fleeing the war have become part of our communities, become neighbours, colleagues, classmates and friends. Their resilience and determination to continue living their lives have enriched our towns and villages, even as their hearts remain tied to loved ones in Ukraine. I give an example of Elaine, a dental professor, now working as a dental nurse in Bradford-on-Avon, as there are difficulties with the recognition of her qualifications, something that ministers might like to address. Our region has also played a direct role in supporting Ukraine's defence. Ukrainian troops have trained on Salisbury Plain alongside British forces to prepare to defend their country and their freedom. In Melksham, down the road from my office, local business Avon Protection and their workers have manufactured vital protective equipment, sending thousands of gas masks a small local part of an extraordinary international effort. And for this, I thank the Secretary of State for Defence for his help personally with the funds needed to make this happen. I must also recognise the power of voices raised in opposition to war and pleading for peace. Ukrainian campaigners in our communities up and down the country have been continually speaking out for justice and accountability. I also stand with those members of the Free Russia community in the UK, like the members of the Russia Democratic Society, who I met in London last weekend at a demonstration outside the Russian embassy, who showed great courage in standing up against Putin's aggression and repression, often at immense personal cost. This anniversary is a moment of remembrance, but it's also a call to action. This is not a distant war of the past, but one raging as we speak. The people of this country stand firmly with Ukraine, and I hope the government will continue to do all it can to protect Ukraine's sovereignty. We must stand firm in these increasingly difficult times against tyranny, defend the principles of democracy, sovereignty and peace. Ukraine's fight is not a distant one. It's felt on the streets of our constituencies and in the corridors of this place. Members may like to join me tonight in Portcullis House at 7:30 p.m. to hear members of the Lviv National Philharmonic Orchestra play in recognition of the 4th anniversary of the invasion. Thank you.
Aphra Brandreth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The contributions from Honourable and Right Honourable members this afternoon have been a powerful reminder of the unity that exists across this House and indeed across our country in steadfast support of the Ukrainian people. In April 2025, I had the privilege of visiting Ukraine alongside fellow members of the Foreign Affairs Committee and seeing firsthand the courage and determination of Ukraine's leadership, its armed forces and its citizens has stuck with me. It's reinforced the importance that we continue to stand by Ukraine. And it's also made me even more grateful for our armed forces who every day stand ready to protect all of us. When we think of war, our minds often turn first to the battlefield, yet war's cruelty extends far beyond the front line and the impacts of it can reach into homes and families. And one example of that is in the horrific impact of this conflict on Ukrainian children. The treatment of Ukrainian children by Russian forces has been abhorrent, reflecting the same brutality and disregard for humanity that has characterised this invasion from the outset. Children have been killed, injured and displaced by this war. And at the same time, as other members have noted, Russia has deported at least, but likely far more than 20,000 Ukrainian children to Russia. Every day, Madam Deputy Speaker, Ukrainian parents face the unthinkable reality of their children being taken from them. While the exact numbers are disputed, we know the true figure is likely far higher than reported, and that alone should concern us all. I want to pay tribute to Save Ukraine, who I met during my visit, and the other organisations all working tirelessly to locate and rescue children abducted by Russian forces. They have brought hundreds home and deserve our deepest admiration and thanks. But for every child returned, many more remain missing. And we must confront the grim reality that many of these children are subjected to indoctrination, pressured to abandon their identity, their culture, and even their own families. Addressing this crisis demands determined international support, and the UK must stand ready to play its part. Madam Deputy Speaker, whilst this war is being fought on the battlefield in Ukraine, there are lessons for us here in the UK that we must learn from this conflict, because this war has shown us that whilst high-intensity attritional conflict has not gone away, the character of war is changing. 4 years on, this is a grinding struggle of endurance, fought not only with artillery and armour, but with technology that is reshaping how force is applied. One lesson is unmistakable: the rise of drones and autonomous systems. These unmanned systems are now central to the battlefield. They are relatively cheap, widely available, and capable of inflicting serious damage. They have lowered the barrier to air power and given small units unprecedented reach.
future wars will almost certainly feature drones as a core component of operations. So we must ask, are we adapting quickly enough? We need to learn not only how to use these systems, but how to defend against them. And recent reporting on exercises in Estonia illustrated this starkly. A small team operating unmanned systems was reportedly able to destroy multiple armoured vehicles in a matter of hours. That is the reality of modern warfare: low cost, high impact. We must ensure our armed forces are prepared for that reality, equipped, trained, and funded to meet it. Thankfully, Ukraine has adapted with remarkable speed and courage. The use of drones and semi-autonomous systems, integrated cyber and electronic operations, and flexible, resilient supply chains have all been decisive. At the same time, this war has reminded us that some fundamentals never change. Logistics matter, supply lines matter, endurance matters. Armies still need ammunition, equipment, and the ability to sustain operations over time. Ukrainian forces have shown how innovation, rapid decision-making, and coordination across land, sea, air, and cyber can offset a larger opponent. They have taken the fight to Russian forces in ways few predicted at the start of this invasion. The lesson is clear. Modern warfare is not just about numbers. It is about adaptability, resilience, and the ability to evolve faster than your adversary. So as we rightly admire Ukraine's heroism, we must also ask ourselves a serious question. Are our own armed forces equipped, organised, and funded to meet that same test? Because adaptation requires investment, and that is a conversation that must involve not only the Ministry of Defence, but the Treasury as well. Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to turn briefly to talk about one more aspect of the war in Ukraine and the lessons we can take from it. From the moment Russian tanks illegally crossed the border from Crimea into Ukraine, Britain and His Majesty's government has stood foursquare behind our friends in Kyiv. We have provided financial support, we have trained Ukrainian troops, and we have convened international partners. We ought to be proud of the support we have given to Ukraine, both the previous government and the current. But as this war marks its 4th year since the full-scale invasion, we must not let our unity and support be worn down by Russia. A lasting and just peace must be the aim, and I support efforts to end the war as quickly as possible. But as President Zelensky has said, we know appeasement is not the answer, and that Putin is an irrational actor who will see only weakness if we, the West, were to give in to his demands. We learned this lesson before, and we must remember it today. We must continue to strengthen the international coalition in support of Ukraine, not to allow it to be worn down. And as we stand resolute in our support alongside our partners, I would urge the government to continue to work with allies, in particular the United States, to reiterate how valuable they are to the collective stance we are taking against tyranny in the form of Putin. Madam Deputy Speaker, Ukraine's courage has shown us both the brutality of aggression and the strength of a nation determined to defend its freedom. Our duty is now clear. We must continue to stand firmly with Ukraine, resist the temptation of complacency, and ensure that Britain is fully prepared for the realities of modern conflict. That means sustained support for Kyiv, renewed resolve amongst our allies, and serious investment in our own armed forces. It is not enough to be the coalition of the willing. We must be the coalition of the prepared, prepared to deter, prepared to defend, and prepared to lead. Thank you.
Richard Foord.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last night, I joined with the Minister of State for the Armed Forces and the former leader of the Conservative Party, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green, at Trafalgar Square for a rally for Ukraine. And it was a really moving event. The hosts from all across the UK, the Ukrainian families, the children, the mothers, the wives, and other relatives were all gathered in Trafalgar Square, that place where on the 8th of May 1945 Brits welcomed victory in Europe. And in my speech today I want to set out why we in the UK need to see Ukraine reach a victory in Europe. So, as I thank the Ukrainian people for their courage and determination, I also want to talk about what we're not doing right here in the UK. And I feel like we can go so much further with respect to economic sanctions on Russia. Firstly, I want to just address some comments that the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson made on the Laura Conisbrough Sunday programme, where he talked about there being, quote, no logical reason that I can see why we shouldn't send some peaceful ground forces to show our support, our constitutional support for a free, independent Ukraine. I just want to dwell on the idea of sending peaceful ground forces. We don't have in the British Army peaceful ground forces. What we have is war fighters. And we have war fighters because the war fighters make the best peacekeepers. But be in no doubt that there is some, there is no distinction between a war fighter and a peacekeeper. And so the notion of peaceful ground forces is really for the birds. I think rather we need to double down on what we are doing currently, which is proving very successful at keeping the Russians at bay. And that is first and foremost with economic sanctions. The price of Urals crude, Russia's main grade of crude oil, now trades at 25 to 30% a discount compared to our own Brent crude, and exports of it are at their lowest since they have been since 2020. Oil and gas budget receipts for the Kremlin halved in January, year on year, to just under 400 billion rubles. The British government announced in October last year that it would ban all imports of oil products refined in third countries from Russian origin crude oil. And alongside this, the Chancellor of the Exchequer said at the time, we will hold to account all those enabling his illegal invasion of Ukraine. But, I know that the Minister for North America and Europe has appeared in front of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we talked about sanctions. And the work that his department, the FCDO, does on identifying entities to sanction is good, but it could go so much further. The Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air has found that refineries in countries like India, Turkey and Brunei continue to use Russian crude oil. And this continues to be exported to Europe and to the UK. That said, the EU has now imposed a complete ban on imports from third countries. They brought that in on the 21st of January. The ban on direct imports coming into force in the UK in 2022 has had a so-called refining loophole. This refining loophole has enabled the import of £4 billion of jet fuel and other products, other oil products made at refineries in India and Turkey, which run partially on Russian crude. And the estimate by this research centre is that £1.6 billion worth of products imported from these refineries would have been made with imported Russian oil. Now, our constituents will hear those figures and will put those in one hand and then look at the other hand at the £3 billion of taxpayers' money that we are rightly giving to Ukraine every year at the moment, and they will not be able to reconcile the two, and nor should they be. We have to properly sanction the Russian Federation. I just want finally to say that we have to thank the Ukrainians for their courage and determination. I will. Thank you.
Giving way, Madam Deputy Speaker. I wondered if you would join with me in recognising recent opinion polling that has shown the UK remains steadfast in its support among its population for the people of Ukraine, and that part of that is local associations like that in Glasgow of Ukrainians who promote Ukrainian culture and remind us all of the contribution that they are making to our country.
Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
I think the Honourable Member makes an excellent point, and that Ukrainian culture was on full display last night at that Trafalgar Square rally. To conclude, we are sometimes at the moment talking down NATO and certainly the European parts of NATO, and we shouldn't do it because what we have in NATO is the strongest military alliance the world has ever seen. And Putin should be in no doubt about the intent of NATO states to fulfil our NATO obligations, including to such NATO members as Estonia and Latvia that have Russian minority populations. Speaking at the rally yesterday evening, the Right Honourable Member for Chingford and Woodford Green reminded us of a quote from Churchill: "Give us the tools and we will finish the job." Something that Churchill said to the British people and indeed to allies across the water in 1941. And this applies very much to today. We also need to think about how we give Ukraine the tools it needs to finish the job. But more than that, we need to deprive Russia of tools too, so that it can no longer wage this war of aggression against a people who want what we have and sometimes take for granted in this country: democracy and liberty. Thank you.
Ben Obese-Jecty.
Madam Deputy Speaker. Putin has already started World War III. The question now is how much territory he is able to seize and how to stop him. Russia wants to be able to impose on the world a different way of life and change the lives people have chosen for themselves. So said President Zelensky as he marked the 4th anniversary of the conflict in Ukraine following Russia's illegal invasion. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is humbling to address the House in this debate today, as we enter the 5th year of this conflict, seemingly without end, as peace talks falter at the current impasse. The last 4 years of conflict in Ukraine have been savage, unrelenting, a level of total war that we have been fortunate enough to become unacquainted with in this country during any of our lifetimes. The toll this has taken on the civilian population has been horrific. Over 15,000 Ukrainian civilian deaths, thousands more displaced, an entire population whose lives have been put on hold, forever changed, lives lost, families devastated, future hopes and dreams shattered. And yet Ukraine has held firm against the Russian onslaught. It did in 2022, as it does today. The government has remained steadfast in its support for Ukraine, and that support extended to the government when they too were in opposition. When we were in government, we stood foursquare with Ukraine from the very start. We were the first nation to openly back the Ukrainian forces with weapons. This House has been united in its support, and that support has been vital. And that support is not only to protect Ukrainian sovereignty in the face of such flagrant disregard for international law, but also represents the FLOT, the forward line of own troops for the defence of Europe. We've all seen the changes that this war has brought. A new Cold War, maybe even a phony war, a generational leap in the nature of warfare in just 4 years that has catapulted drones from a nerdy hobby to a horrific Black Mirror reimagining of modern warfare. Anyone who's seen any of the... I will give way.
Honourable gentleman for giving way. He's talking about drones, and a couple of weeks ago I was at the Munich Security Conference where I had the privilege of hearing President Zelensky speak. He said that last month, the month of January, Ukraine was attacked by more than 6,000 Shahed drones, which are of course made in Iran or in Russia based on Iranian design. I wonder if he agrees with me that the sheer scale of bombardment that Ukraine faces from these drones and from these countries who wish our country ill as well is just one reason why our country is right to stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
I would wholeheartedly concur with that view, and I think the Iranians in particular are the global leaders in exporting terror, backing as they do the Houthis, Hezbollah and Hamas as well. And so their provision of the Shahed drone to Russia, that bombardment that the Ukrainians face is a terrible, terrible toll and a terrible result of the way that this has been put forward. Anyone who has seen any of the innumerable videos of FPV drone footage of individual soldiers being stalked and killed by drones cannot fail to appreciate the new reality of modern warfare. The last year alone has seen Russia increase its use of drones by 200%, to the Honourable Lady's point. This capability sea change cannot be overstated. 4 years into Putin's 3-day special military operation, Russia has sustained a staggering 1.2 million casualties, 325,000 of them fatalities. And to put that into context, that is fast approaching the number of soldiers that we lost in the entirety of the Second World War. The majority of casualties now are caused by drones, reportedly 70 to 80%. It's reported that Russia can no longer recruit new soldiers at the rate they're being lost. And in the past fortnight, Ukraine has liberated 300 square kilometres in its southern counteroffensive. 4 years into this conflict, and the remarkable bravery of the Ukrainian armed forces remains undiminished. Yes, we've supported them with materiel, intelligence, rapid procurement, funding, But the human sacrifice required to win, or crucially, not lose, a war of sovereignty and survival is something we perhaps do not address enough. 55,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed since 2022, more than 2/3 of the size of our regular army. From the contributions this afternoon, it is clear that on both sides of this House, we want to see an end to this conflict and an end on Ukraine's terms, one that does not see them acquiesce to the Russian threat they have given so much to keep at bay. But in the broader context of European security, what comes next? There are significant lessons to be learned from the conflict in Ukraine. No war has been as visually documented at such close quarters as this. The lessons exploitation cell at the Land Warfare Centre will have been busy shaping our future tactics, an example of which is the recently released outcome of NATO's Exercise Hedgehog 2025 in Estonia, whereby in training against experienced Ukrainian drone operators, a team of just 10 were able to render 2 battalions combat ineffective in just half a day. We are through the looking glass. Last Saturday, the Defence Secretary wrote a piece for the Telegraph newspaper where he explicitly stated, "I want to be the Defence Secretary who deploys British troops to Ukraine, because this will mean that the war is finally over." But to paraphrase Winston Churchill, that will simply be the end of the beginning. The Minister doesn't need me to tell him that the ceasefire will simply facilitate a reconstitution of Russian forces. To use an old adage, Russia will trade space for time. And when they return to their barracks, to the Leningrad military district, they will be based only a few minutes from the Estonian border. Pskov, the home of the 76th Guards Air Assault Division and the 2nd Spetsnaz Brigade, is just 35 kilometres away. Our commitment to the NATO Foord land forces already man the line in Estonia via Operation Coatbridge, one of our ongoing commitments. The battle group deployed there serves as a deterrent to further Russian expansionism and belligerence. No longer just a strategic tripwire, it is a force now equipped with a capability in Project Asgard that presents a lethal recce strike system, a force whose very presence provides Estonia with the security of the NATO umbrella. A force so vital, its ongoing presence is apparently written into the Estonia's defence strategy. I'll give way.
I thank him for giving way, and he's making an excellent speech. Whilst we want the war in Estonia, in Ukraine to end, and of course we want Britain to play a key leading role in that, including, if appropriate, the provision of troops, does he not share my fear, when we zoom out and look at the geopolitical context, that putting troops in Estonia, in Ukraine, stops us from guarding other areas on the eastern flank and, to use military terminology, fixes most of our forces there where they might be needed elsewhere?
I thank the honourable member for his contribution. I hope he hasn't stolen a look at my speech in advance, as I'm about to come on to just that. But I do agree with him, and I think the point that he's making, there is potentially a trade-off to be made between putting troops on the ground in Ukraine and putting troops on the ground in the High North. And there is a possibility that doing both of those things to the sufficient level that we require may prove to be too much of a challenge. We are committed in Estonia, just as we are to be committed in Ukraine. It's previously been reported that a commitment to a post-ceasefire force would be around 7,500 troops, smaller than our peak commitment in Afghanistan, but that reflects the difference in posture. While 7,500 doesn't sound like a lot, only circa 10% of the current army, it doesn't reflect that you need 3 times that number to sustain that deployment. By the time you're on the second 6-month rotation through Ukraine, you have 7,500 who've just returned from the first tour, the second 7,500 currently doing the job, and the next 7,500 training to go. 22,000 odd from a field army of, say, 40,000 means over half of the army will be committed to manning the eastern flank deterrence line. It was reported in the Telegraph yesterday that multiple members of the Coalition of the Willing have privately conceded that their contribution to the post-ceasefire peacekeeping mission depended on permission from Vladimir Putin. So could the Minister, in his summing up, confirm whether every country in the Coalition of the Willing has committed to deploying troops to the peacekeeping mission in Ukraine alongside ourselves? Include the aforementioned battle group in Estonia, and that's another 3,000 operating on the same cycle. Factor in ongoing commitments like NATO's Allied Reaction Force Special Operations Component, which we lead for the next year, FIRIC, the Resident Infantry Battalion in Deucalion, as well as the process of retraining and rearming for the plethora of planned new capabilities, and the number of personnel quickly adds up under the stacked readiness of multiple commitments. With the Prime Minister announcing our commitment to Operation Firecrest this year with the Carrier Strike Group, as well as the expanded Royal Marines commitment in Norway, and suddenly our armed forces are on the cusp of looking overstretched, doubly so in the event that anything else comes into scope or goes hot. I highlight these challenges to draw out the complexity of the broader strategic issue. The only way this level of operational commitment will be feasible is if, like our European allies, we properly fund defence. That's why we've called upon the government to go faster and spend 3% of GDP on defence by the end of this Parliament in order to ensure they can deliver the 62 recommendations in the Strategic Defence Review already pledged. but the Defence Investment Plan itself is 6 months late, strongly suggesting that the plan, as it stands, is unaffordable. So can the Minister confirm that it will finally be published before the Easter recess? It is imperative that the plan addresses the growing capability gaps as warfare spiral develops in Eastern Europe. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, I believe we are on a collision course with a Russia that is on a war footing, that is replenishing its lost equipment and that is rearming fast. Putin will only take us seriously when he sees our factories producing at wartime rates, and that's why I believe so strongly in the need to rebuild our own national arsenal and reconnect society with its armed forces. The urgency could not be clearer. Just ask yourself, if you knew that our soldiers would be involved in large-scale combat operations in 2027, what would you be doing differently, and why are you not doing it? Those aren't my words, Madam Deputy Speaker. Those are the words of the Chief of the General Staff, General Sir Rowley Walker. He said them yesterday. As we mark the 4th anniversary of Vladimir Putin's needless and tragic war, I'm sure everyone in this House would agree. I hope we're not here to mark a 5th. Slava Ukraini.
Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Any contribution to this debate surely must start with a tribute to the remarkable courage of the Ukrainian people. 4 years ago, at the start of Vladimir Putin's brutal full-scale invasion of Ukraine, many expected Russian tanks to be on the streets of Kyiv within days. They didn't come because brave Ukrainian troops held them back. And today, 4 years later, there are still no tanks on the streets in Kyiv, and Ukraine is not broken. Ukraine still holds around 80% of its territory, and the Russian troops move at glacial speed with an astonishing and tragic number of Russians dead. Young men sent to fight for an imperialist autocrat, a self-indulgent dream that has become his nightmare, stopped by the resistance of the Ukrainian people, by their extraordinary resilience, innovation and sacrifice. And we have heard already about that sacrifice, that Ukrainians have suffered more than 500,000 military casualties. At least 15,000 civilians have been killed, and millions have been forced from their homes, towns and cities relentlessly bombarded, hospitals, schools targeted. And that line that they have held for 4 years is the line that separates us all in Europe and here in the UK from a brutal authoritarian dictatorship and the threat to liberal democracy that Putin wants to destroy, because liberal democracy threatens him. Britain has stepped up, and I am proud to be on these benches and look around to the cross-party consensus that Ukraine is not alone in its fight and that we stand with them. And as Putin seeks to reduce Ukraine to a dependent and weakened state, we must be absolutely clear. Sovereignty is not a bargaining chip. Any peace must be shaped by Ukrainians themselves. And I urge the government to continue to work closely with our allies to ensure Ukraine is not strong-armed into an unjust and unstable peace. The war has given rise to Europe's largest displacement crisis since the Second World War. 7 million Ukrainians now live abroad as refugees, with a further 5 million displaced within their own country. And I want to note the 700-odd Ukrainians in my constituency of Esher and Walton. You are very welcome, and we are proud to have you. And to pay tribute to residents in my constituency who opened up their homes generously, and to the work of Elmbridge Borough Council and our local charity, the brilliant Elmbridge Can, who have housed and helped families integrate. Ukrainians are now making Esher and Walton richer, teaching in our schools, including Walton Lee, chefs, carers, nurses, and Father Rosalind, the parish priest at St Erkenwald's Catholic Church in Walton. Among them are Tatiana and Lena, who once ran their own tourist company in Kyiv. When war broke out 4 years ago, they put their children in cars and drove across Europe to stay with host families in my constituency. Today, they are rebuilding their lives, running a gardening business while studying garden design, as one of their husbands continues to fight on the front line, and one of their boys is at Esher College, having excelled at his GCSEs. We are lucky to have them with us. Another Lena living in Thames Ditton has 3 children, 2 at secondary school and 1 at university, and she told me, "We are deeply grateful to the UK for the safety, support, protection and kindness that we have received. We are doing everything we can to rebuild stable, productive lives, working, paying taxes, learning the language, and our children are growing up in British schools. We want to not only rebuild our lives, but also to give back to the country that helped us in our most difficult times. The greatest challenge we face today, though, is uncertainty about our future. If we are required to return because the war is considered over, my greatest fear would be for my children. They have already integrated here. They have friends, education, routines, and a sense of emotional stability, again, after displacement and trauma. Forcing them to start over for a second time would be a profound psychological strain. For many families, the end of active war does not mean life is safe or normal. Homes have been destroyed, communities damaged. Some people simply have nowhere to go. So the 24-month visa is welcome, but it still leaves many families living with uncertainty. We Liberal Democrats are calling for an automatic visa extensions, a clear route to long-term status, trauma-informed education for children, and real stability for families who are already contributing so much for our communities. Another one of my constituents, Graham, has offered his home to Ukrainian guest Christina Hoytsk. She is desperate to reunite with her parents, but the reintroduction of biometric requirements forcing people to travel to cities under nightly attack is making this extremely dangerous. I urge the government to address this issue as soon as possible. Let me now turn to the aid situation. It is reassuring that the government has decided to protect overseas aid spend for Ukraine this year. But while welcome, the increase is modest, and at a moment when global aid flows are collapsing, it will not do as much as we would like. At the same time, the government has decided to slash overseas aid, meaning that it will become harder for us to sustain aid flows to Ukraine in the coming years. This is a strategic mistake because overseas aid is not charity, it is an investment in our own security. A stable Ukraine deters Russian aggression across Europe. It sends a clear message that borders cannot be redrawn by force. It raises the cost of future wars. Poverty and hardship in any country sends people into the arms of those who offer a populist, easy message. Aid stabilises societies. It prevents crises from spiralling into conflict, displacement and insecurity that ultimately reaches our shores. And Ukraine shows what continuous, serious aid flows can achieve. Our support has helped keep a country under siege functioning. It has strengthened civilian morale, and it has reinforced a frontline state standing between Europe and authoritarian expansion. That is what properly funded aid looks like, and I hope the government does not throw away the progress it has made and reverses course on the aid cuts as soon as possible. The Liberal Democrats are calling on the government to take bolder action. First, we must scale up our military and bring forward plans to reach 3% of GDP on defence as quickly as possible, instead of waiting until the next decade. Our armed forces have been hollowed out, such that we now have the lowest troop numbers in over 200 years, while stockpiles have become depleted. That weakens support for Ukraine and makes us feel less safe here at home. And let me be clear, defence must not come at the expense of development. It is a false and dangerous narrative to pitch the one against the other. And as the US General and Secretary of State Jim Mattis said, if you don't fund the State Department fully, then I need to buy more ammunition, ultimately. Second, we must hit the Russian war machine where it hurts. Over £30 billion worth of frozen Russian assets sit in the UK alone. And the Liberal Democrats have introduced legislation for these to be seized and redirected to Ukraine's defence and reconstruction. And I urge the government to put this into law as soon as possible. We should also work with G7 partners to lower the oil price cap, cutting directly into Putin's war profits. And third, accountability matters. The war crimes that we have seen in this tragic conflict, from the attacks on humanitarian convoys, to the missile strikes on churches and children's playgrounds, to the abduction of an estimated 35,000 Ukrainian children, have shocked the conscience of the world. I went to see the ICRC in Geneva and saw the records of soldiers and the work they are doing to reunite families and children and identify the missing so that their families can have closure. I applaud their quiet work. International law must be upheld, and war criminals like Putin must not be allowed to act with impunity. The rules-based order is under attack, making the work of vital international institutions, such as the United Nations and the International Criminal Court, even more important in this climate, and of course NATO. Putin would like nothing more than for the UN and NATO to collapse, so we must protect it, and I urge the government to continue full-throated support for these vital entities and resist pressure from the United States to ignore or defy them. So today, 4 years on, We are proud to still stand with Ukraine. Let us not allow Ukraine to be forced into a settlement that rewards aggression and leaves all of us less safe, because the Ukrainian people are fighting not just their war, but our war. They deserve nothing less than our full, unwavering commitment. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, if I may, I want to end with a poem written by Nikita Balakin, my constituent, Ukrainian, who is 9 and at Cleves School in Oatlands. Mum, me and one suitcase, 3 of us only. I left my cat, I left my dog, and all my dreams behind in the fog. I was just 5, but looked like more, because I knew the world of war. New country, language, school and friends. Thanks to everyone who helps. I started to smile and play the games, and I can start to hope again. I want the world to see my joy. Peace is the biggest dream of a Ukrainian boy.
Ian Room.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It gives me great pleasure being one of the last speakers to be involved in such a unifying debate across all sides of this House where we can all agree on the same thing. So it gives me great pleasure in saying that I'd like to associate myself with all those members who have spoken before me today across this House. This country should be immensely proud of the support it has given to Ukraine in their hour of need. The Kremlin has thrown international law onto the bonfire, but the Ukrainian people are defending their homeland bravely against a brutal invasion. We have seen scenes of trench warfare, scenes of civilians being evacuated on trains or sheltering from air raids in underground stations, things we thought we had left behind in the last century. But far from collapsing in days, as Putin believed, the Ukrainians have shamed the Russian army at every turn. Without British support, things might have been very different. The full list of military capabilities the UK has given the Ukrainian defence effort is eye-opening. We must commend our world-class armed forces who have trained more than 62,000 Ukrainian personnel, a number fast approaching the size of the entire British Army. We have given thousands of anti-tank missiles, artillery units and armoured vehicles, specialist air defence systems, radar systems and long-range cruise missiles. More than 10,000 drones, search and rescue helicopters, electronic warfare equipment, night vision, body armour and medical essentials. A lifeline worth more than £21 billion. Thanks to the hard work of the Pickwell Foundation, my own constituency of North Devon have sheltered more than 230 Ukrainian evacuees, as have countless communities across the country, as we've heard in this House today. Last year, I visited Kyiv with the Defence Select Committee. A poignant moment for me personally was when our delegation paid our respects at the wall of remembrance of those fallen. Just seeing those photos, multitude of photos on that wall, brings it home to you and all those families who are now have lost a loved one. I will give way.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I commend everyone who has spoken? I'm minded 4 years ago the Russians entered Bucha. They murdered, killed, raped. They packed 200 civilians, men, women and children into a basement, and then they killed them all. Does he agree with me that when it comes to accountability, those murderers, Russian scoundrels and thugs who killed and raped and destroyed people's lives, that they should see a retribution, that they must be made accountable? And does he agree when it comes to our role to play, that we should play our role in this Westminster to ensure that those people are brought to justice and put in jail for the rest of their lives?
I totally agree with what the Right Honourable Gentleman has said and highlighted just now, and I'm sure the Minister will take notes of that, but I entirely agree that they should be held accountable for their crimes that they have committed. So thank you. On that same trip to Kyiv, we met with many Ukrainian parliamentarians, including the Ukrainian Veterans Minister, a role that is new to the Ukrainians, and it was a great pleasure that they wanted to learn from the UK how we support the welfare and rehabilitation of veterans returning from combat. And I know personally that the Minister from Ukraine has met with organisations such as the Royal British Legion to see how we support our veterans so they can take that learning back to Ukraine.
Would the honourable gentleman give way?
I will give way.
I apologise, Madam Deputy Speaker, coming so late to the debate and intervening so shortly, but along with a few other colleagues have just returned from Ukraine, where we were able to be at the fourth memorial of the invasion of Ukraine and commemorate the deaths there. And the honourable gentleman is making a powerful speech, and we felt the attacks in Odessa, in Kyiv, that the people live through every day, and the horrific endurance that is having to be shown by the Ukrainian people. But they do appreciate what the UK has done in all the ways that the honourable gentleman has said, and specifically spoke to a member of staff yesterday for veterans about the fact that they've followed and very much taken a UK approach and have created hubs for veterans around the country. So does the honourable gentleman agree we must continue to work with them so we can learn from each other?
I certainly do agree with the honourable gentleman, and I thank you for telling us about your recent visit and the way that you can visit. You know, it's great that we can share that learning as well, not just on the military capabilities. But for the last 4 years, it must be a lesson for us here in the UK, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the front lines, we have seen the invention of the fibre optic drone, of cyber sabotage, the emergence of artillery targeting apps and rapid procurement portals. In the UK and Europe, we must contend with Russian activities within the grey zone. Ukrainians have suffered a terrible winter, even as the Russians have bombarded critical energy infrastructure. Last year, President Zelensky told us, Russia's tactics are to murder people and terrorise them with the cold. We must pay attention.
On that point, my honourable friend,
I will give way.
because he raises a really valid point about the tactics that Putin is using at the moment. And in Ukraine, temperatures have dropped to minus 20, and that has profound consequences for everyone in Ukraine. We've got not only are individuals freezing to death, huge effect on those fighting on the front line, but also military veterans with prosthetics aren't able to recharge their limbs either. And the World Bank reports that a 21% jump in damaged or destroyed energy infrastructure from a year ago would cost $1 billion to rebuild. So does my honourable friend agree with me that the government must urgently seize billions in the Russian assets and directly use those proceeds to help Ukraine rebuild its infrastructure?
Yeah.
The honourable lady makes a poignant point there, and yes, I totally agree, so thank you for making that point. We are relearning the strategic importance of war fighting here in the UK, the importance of deterrence, readiness and resilience at home, the importance of sticking with European allies we could have taken for granted. It is important that civil society here in the UK understands the hardship faced by the Ukrainian people. If Russia succeeds in using force to redraw borders, it threatens the collective security of the entire European continent of NATO and threatens our safety here in the UK. Madam Deputy Speaker, facing down tyrants is in this country's DNA. Ukraine will fight on and we must back them. There is no stronger defence than showing we are good to our word. Thank you.
I call the Shadow Minister, Mark Francois.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I begin by saying it's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for North Devon, who always speaks knowledgeably on defence matters, not just because of his own service, and he has done so again today. I must apologise to the House for missing the initial speeches in this debate. Normally I would not do that, but I offer the small excuse that I've been travelling for 17 hours, and like my right honourable friend, the member for Beverley and Holderness, I have just returned hot foot, as it were, from Kiev. And I'm very grateful, under these unusual circumstances, to you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and indeed Mr Speaker, for allowing me to sum up for us, and indeed to report back, in effect, to the House on what we learned from our trip to Ukraine. So the context is that I, in my role as Shadow Armed Forces Minister, was one of around 20 UK MPs in the largest delegation that I believe we have ever sent to Ukraine, including MPs from all the main parties in the House of Commons, though there was no MP from Reform. And I regret, in all sincerity, that yet again, when we are debating foreign policy and defence in this House, the the Reform benches are empty. I have always believed, as the son of a D-Day veteran, that the first duty of government, above all others, is the defence of the realm. So those who aspire to form a government should at least be bothered to turn up and talk about it. Can I also pay particular tribute to the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South, who, while we were there, was presented with President Zelensky's Order of Merit for the brilliant campaigning that she has undertaken on behalf of Ukrainian children who have been captured and forcibly adopted by Russian families, or in some cases with older children put into military training camps for the Russian army, totally and utterly contrary to the Geneva Convention. She has been a stalwart campaigner on this issue. We know that in this House, but so now does the President of Ukraine, and we honour her for the honour that she has done us. I'd also like, because if I don't mention him, I'll never hear the end of it, to mention a former Member of Parliament, the member for Filton and Bradley Stoke, Jack Lepresti, who served in Afghanistan as a reservist and has now recently joined the Ukrainian army and is serving as a specialist in communications and information warfare. And good luck and Godspeed, Jack, in all that you do. And our main purpose in going was to attend the official ceremony of the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, which we did in Maidan Square yesterday morning. And the ceremony was also attended by President Zelensky and his wife, and by Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Union, and then several other European Prime Ministers and Foreign Ministers, including our own Foreign Secretary, who had a platoon of British MPs to support her in her duty. We all laid a small commemorative lamp. We all paid our respects. And in some ways, this is the Ukrainian equivalent of our ceremony at the Cenotaph in November, and I can report to the House it was carried out with equal solemnity and respect. We were visiting Ukraine. I will, yes.
I'm most grateful. As he knows, I was with him in Kyiv on that occasion. I managed to exchange a few words with President Zelensky to point out that the British delegation were there, and he made it very clear that he was very pleased to see us there and we were very welcome, and it was an honour to give him our support.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. It was great to have him as a colleague on that visit. He brought his great knowledge of defence and foreign affairs to our trip. I can also report to the House that the right honourable member for Beverley and Holderness exchanged some humorous words with President Zelensky, but they are probably best left to posterity. We visited at a very difficult time. And as well as being in Kiev, we visited Odessa initially, via Moldova, which was, while we were there, for part of the time, under drone and missile attack. We visited Chernobyl, which I am pleased to report was not under drone or missile attack, although it was attacked by Russian drones some months ago, incredibly irresponsibly. And then we moved on to Kiev, which again, for part of our time there, was under bombardment. We had burner phones. I don't think I'm giving away any secrets to say that. And they put an app on it which goes off if there is an air raid warning. And I simply say to the House, when that happens, it's quite sobering. But there's also an all clear. And with typical Ukrainian humour and defiance, when they play the all clear, it is followed by the words, "May the force be with you." We had multiple meetings while we were there. We were there for the people come and go on these delegations, as the House knows. But between us, we were there for the best part of a week. So we met with senior staff from the Office of the President, who gave us an up-to-date briefing on the state of the ceasefire negotiations. We met with a dozen Ukrainian MPs from the Ukrainian-UK Friendship Group. We had an intelligence briefing from the Ukrainian military. We visited several bombed-out residential apartments, including, I am sad to say, one on Kiev's left bank, which has suffered particularly heavily as this is an industrial area and a logistics centre where there's a lot of working-class housing, a bit like the East End of London in some ways. And we visited one apartment where, tragically, 23 innocent people were killed, including several children, in a Russian strike, which we think was aimed at the railway marshalling yards nearby. But as it was a drone, it was not as accurate as a hypersonic missile, and these people were tragically murdered. We also attended a veterans rehabilitation centre. As the Secretary of State, who's with us, will know, when I was the Veterans Minister, I had a bit to do with that. I'm proud of the fact we managed to provide the genie and prosthetic for our wounded. And we saw the Ukrainian equivalent of a rehabilitation centre. And I understand that this is one area where Britain has been able to provide some advice and expertise, which was clearly warmly welcomed on our visit. And we attended the official opening of the Ukrainian Parliament, the Rada, where I'm pleased to report to the House the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, who is a big man in every sense, acknowledged one by one all of the international delegations, but the loudest applause was for the Polish delegation and the British delegation. I think you probably couldn't tell between the two, but I think the MPs in the Rada were under no illusion about who has backed them to the hilt. It was a difficult time, and in all of these different meetings there were essentially three themes which emerged consistently, which we were asked to report back to the House. So I will perform that solemn duty now. Our interlocutors were clear, firstly, that whilst we were formally celebrating, or commemorating, I should say, the 4th anniversary of the full-scale invasion, Ukraine was first invaded by Russia in 2014. They have not been at war with Russia for 4 years, but for 12. Which, to put that into perspective, is longer than both the First and the Second World War put together. I think their resistance for over a decade in the face of the most brutal attacks from a larger and more powerful neighbour deserves the respect and admiration of every single member of this House and every single citizen in this country. They are fighting for us. They are fighting for the same values, for freedom, democracy and the right to decide their own destiny. Their fight is our fight. We spoke a lot to people about morale. I think it is realistic. There are many in Ukraine that long for peace for very understandable reasons. But they were all clear on one thing, which was they would not accept peace at any price. Too much blood has been shed by the youth of Ukraine to accept a purely unilateral solution proposed by Russia. That theme came out multiple times. Secondly, on sanctions. Most of the Ukrainians that we spoke to in these meetings were understandably keen for an extension of sanctions by the Western democracies, not least with regard to frozen Russian assets, a subject, Madam Deputy Speaker, we've debated in this House on multiple occasions. Many Ukrainians feel now really is the time for the Western democracies to bite the bullet on this and use those 300 billion or so of frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. But they also had a particular point, and here I ask for the, if I may, for the Minister's special attention, with regards to the shadow fleet. It is the sale of hydrocarbons, whether oil or gas, which ultimately props up the Russian economy, which allows Putin to spend about 40% of Russia's budget on his military, and also allows him to recruit mercenaries to fight in the Russian armed forces. In some cases, mercenaries are being offered up to $38,000 as a signing-on fee to fight in the Russian armed forces. But according to Ukrainian intelligence, and they said we could say this, the average life expectancy of those mercenaries is 4 months. But they would like to see much greater sanctioning of the shadow fleet. Now, the Minister knows some of those vessels are uninsured, but many are insured, and moreover, many are insured by syndicates at Lloyd's of London. So surely, Minister, there is more that we could do to cramp the activities of the shadow fleet by working with Lloyd's and other insurers, but principally them, to make sure that those ships cannot have insurance, which would make it difficult for them to visit at least some of their destination points. I make a particular point of this because I'm trying to do justice to the Ukrainians who raise this with us again and again and again. They're really hard over on this, and I hope perhaps the Minister could say something in his summing up.
Will the Right Honourable Member give way?
Yes, briefly, if I may. Yes.
On this particular point, the insurance industry is located in large part in London, and the British government has talked about a maritime services ban, but has talked about it on a timeline that might bring it to an end in this calendar year. Does he see any reason why this maritime services ban cannot come into effect until the end of this year?
I'm not an insurance expert and wouldn't claim to be, but surely there is more that we can do. It is not a state secret that Lloyd's of London is a world leader in maritime insurance, and surely there is more that can be done here. And we promised, all of us, that we would relay this back to the House, and Minister, over to you. The third thing...
Can I write a referendum around me on that point?
Yes, of course.
I'm most grateful, because it was also clear in our meetings that the Ukrainians are very pleased with the interception of so far 2 or 3 of these shadow fleet tankers, and are wondering why we can't be far more proactive in this way, with maybe uninsured or unseaworthy boats that shouldn't be at sea with illegal crews. There are many, many legal pretexts upon which we could intervene in international waters with these ships to add to the cost and risk of Russia's oil and gas exports, so reducing their foreign exchange earnings.
Is entirely right. The sale of hydrocarbons, including to China and to India, is effectively Putin's windpipe. Some people now refer to Russia as China's gas station. And if we can do more against those ships, that is important for Ukrainian morale. We were told time and again that when the Ukrainians hear that a Shadow Fleet vessel has been impounded or captured, that raises their morale. This is something we could do in difficult circumstances to raise that morale even further. I think between us we have made the point, and hopefully the Minister can follow up on it. So the third theme that I wanted to stress before I sum up is we were thanked again and again for Britain's support, militarily, diplomatically, economically, in terms of humanitarian aid. Wherever we went, people said, thank you. I think it's true to say that the previous government gave real leadership in Europe on this, and I think it's true to say that the current government have continued in the same vein. But the House should know that people from the office of the President downwards went out of their way to thank us for everything that Britain, and indeed this House, has done. The President of the Speaker of the Rada gave us a sombre warning. He said, and I quote him, "No one knows the Russians better than us. If we fall, you and your friends are next." And it's important that this House appreciates that. So I don't want to spoil the non-partisan spirit of this debate, but there are lessons for us in the United Kingdom too, not just about the overall level of defence spending, but about the long-delayed defence investment plan. We desperately need that document, the Secretary of State. We can't wait much longer. We've waited since the autumn. So again, the ball is in the Secretary of State's court. And it would be good for Ukrainian morale to see Britain committing to a long-term equipment programme too.
Would my right honourable friend give way?
Yes.
I'm extremely grateful to my right honourable friend, and I entirely agree with every word he's made. Perhaps an area where we haven't succeeded, the last government or this one, is sufficiently sharing and narrating and telling the story of the threat to the UK, to our citizens, to suffer the barbarity which the Ukrainians are suffering daily, which will help the Secretary of State and others to make the case in an extremely tough fiscal environment for the kind of resourcing, not only to support Ukraine, but to arm ourselves. And does he agree with me that it would be good to hear from the Minister something about that? Because I still see a disconnect between the way my constituents see the world and the way certainly I see it fresh back from Ukraine.
Is quite right. And the Ukrainians were, and I use the word deliberately, warning us. They've been at war for 12 years. They were warning us not to be complacent, to learn from their suffering about the ability never to take freedom for granted. The Secretary of State has heard me use these words before, say, I crave his indulgence. But the Roman military strategist Vegetus said, civis pacem para bellum. He who desires peace should prepare for war in order to deter it. And we heard those words again in Ukraine. So to conclude, on the Monday evening, before the ceremony in Maidan Square the following day, we were entertained at a reception at the British Embassy, which I hope the Minister will understand the spirit in which this is said, had a slightly humorous moment when the chargé d'affaires thank the British delegation for ignoring Foreign Office advice not to travel to Ukraine in order to be at their reception. And I thank the Minister for his letter also advising us not to go, but I'm terribly sorry we exercised Nelson's eye and we went anyway. It was a wonderful evening in all seriousness, and we were entertained by several people from what the Ukrainians call the cultural forces of Ukraine, including very memorably a group of Ukrainian soldiers who were singing a cappella. They were brilliant. And there were genuine shouts of more and encore at the end. And they encored to Frank Sinatra's My Way. And for those who know the song, there is a wonderful line where Sinatra sings, "To say the things he truly feels, and not the words of one who kneels." The Ukrainians have not knelt. They have not knelt in the face of terrorism. They have not knelt in the face of barbarism, including using highly accurate cruise missiles to deliberately attack children's hospitals. They have not knelt in the face of genocide at places like Bucha. They have stood up. And this House, every man Jackalus, stands with them. Slava Ukraini.
I'll follow that, Minister. Mr Stephen Doughty.
Well, thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions to today's debate, particularly those who've just recently returned from Ukraine, bringing powerful testimony, and having visited Ukraine 3 times myself since the start of this phase, it was rightly pointed out, of Russia's illegal invasion. I have had similar experiences that have shown to me again the tenacity and courage of Ukrainians, which inspire not only this country but the whole world. I don't feel any surprise in that, because I've known Ukrainians for 30 years, and whether it's through their ties with South Wales, my own constituency, Cardiff was twinned with Luhansk. It was Welsh people who helped found the industries in the Donbass and Donetsk. We have a Sebastopol in the South Wales valleys because of British and French troops fighting in the Crimean War in 1855. And we have, like many, many members have referred to today, very powerful Ukrainian communities locally. And it was an honour to join my own constituents who've reached out their homes and their hearts to Ukrainians, as so many have across this House in recent weeks. I will in a moment. In recent weeks, just the other night, celebrating particularly the contribution of Ukrainian women through an incredible piece of drama and theatre around Matanka dolls, which some of you will know are a very important part of Ukrainian culture. And of course, it is women and girls and civilians who have suffered terribly at the hands of Russia's barbaric attacks. And we must show our continued support and solidarity every single day. And I'm glad, again, we have seen that on all sides of the House. Although I must, as the Shadow Minister reflected, I don't want to sign a discordant note, because I think the unity in this House today, the unity of most of the British people, is very much in that regard. But yet again, we see one party absent, and absence speaks volumes. And that's before we get on to their spouting of Kremlin narratives, or indeed the activities of their former leader in Wales. And I think we need to speak about that, because it is a very serious issue, especially when we see the unity in this House. But I'm very glad, Madam Deputy Speaker, that we've signalled once again that we'll stand with Ukraine today, tomorrow and for years to come. I'm going to give way, and then I'll give way, and then I'll give way.
Very quickly on that point, we would all be intrigued to know who is Reform's defence spokesperson. So if the Minister picks up any hints on that, perhaps he could give me a ring.
Well, again, I think it speaks volumes about where people in this House stand, but that's for them to explain. I'll give way there.
For giving way. On the subject of the Ukrainians living in the valleys, I was visiting with some Ukrainians who are on the Homes for Ukraine scheme in my constituency in Dawlish, and I met with a Ukrainian naval officer, senior naval officer, who was extremely grateful and very relieved that his family were safe and secure in Dawlish. So I thank the government for extending the Homes for Ukraine permission scheme by 2 years last summer, and I thank them again for actually this week enabling them to apply for those visas within 90 days of the end of that visa, as opposed to 28 that it was before. So that is a big relief to the Ukrainians in my constituency and indeed to their officers. Can I ask the Minister what he thinks about the future for people from Ukraine here in the UK?
Yeah. Well, people from Ukraine are very, very welcome here, and as that's been shown by communities up and down the country, and indeed by many members today, and I'm glad he acknowledged that important change we made this week, and it was a point raised by many in the debate. I'll give way briefly, and then I'll try and start responding to some of the points, but my friend.
Thank the honourable member for giving way. Noted the absence of reform from this debate. I also note the absence of the Green Party from this debate. Perhaps they are too busy spreading sectarian hate up in Gorton and Denton, or undermining NATO at every corner. Does the honourable member agree with me on that point?
And it speaks volumes, and it's not the first time. And quite frankly, their comments on defence and NATO in the last few weeks are quite shocking. And I said the other day they should tell that to people in Ukraine or to people in the Baltics. Absolutely extraordinary comments, but again, they speak for themselves. I too have made a long journey to be here today, Madam Deputy Speaker, because I've come directly from the United Nations Security Council, where I had the honour of chairing the Security Council session yesterday on Ukraine and speaking to the United Nations General Assembly, where we joined Ukraine and more than 107 countries in voting for a resolution reaffirming support for Ukraine's sovereignty, independence and territorial integrity. It was a powerful show of global support, but I also had to listen again and again to the abject lies of the Russian representatives. And we all have a job to do in this place, in our communities, in the international forums, where it's the UN, the Council of Europe was mentioned, the OSCE, to speak the truth and to expose Russian lies. And to do that with countries around this world where they are spreading disinformation and division. I'll happily give way.
As my honourable friend will know, our honourable friend for Paisley and Renfrewshire has done a lot of work on the stolen children, and she did mention that the Minister had actually mentioned this while he was over in New York, and she was very touched by that. And would he agree with me that the work she's been doing is fantastic in the face of a horrendous situation?
Well, I absolutely do, and like so many members, I pay tribute to my honourable friend from Paisley and Renfrewshire South. She's actually just sent me a picture of her award from President Zelensky, and she absolutely does deserve that, and I think has spoken powerfully on these issues, and that's why I wanted to communicate what she and so many others have been saying, but most importantly, to communicate the voice of the Ukrainian children that I have met through her work, who have escaped that heinous activity. And I also pay tribute to my right honourable friend for all of the work she's done. I know she's travelled to Ukraine on a number of occasions and always speaks up on these issues powerfully. I was very, very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, at the United Nations that we need to keep up the pressure on Russia to engage meaningfully in the peace process. We was also clear about what peace requires. It requires a full, immediate and unconditional ceasefire. It requires a settlement resulting in a secure, sovereign and independent Ukraine, a settlement where stolen children and prisoners of war are returned, and crucially, where there is justice for the crimes committed by Russia, including horrific sexual violence against men, women and children, as reported by the United Nations. And as I said in New York, and I repeat now, these requirements are what every Ukrainian deserves and what the world deserves. And while I was in New York, as was pointed out, my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, was demonstrating our solidarity with Ukraine on the ground in Kiev, where she announced £30 million in additional funding to strengthen Ukrainian energy resilience and support recovery, taking the total UK support to £21.8 billion since the start of the war. £25 million that will help repair damaged energy infrastructure and support men, women and children whose lives continue to be uprooted by Russia's aggression, and £5 million to support that crucial justice and accountability for victims of alleged Russian war crimes. The Foreign Secretary also announced our largest Russia sanctions package since 2022, nearly 300 new sanctions against Russia, targeting its key revenue streams, critical military goods supply chains and systems set up, as has been rightly pointed out, to undermine existing sanctions. Over 1,200 sanctions now against individuals, entities and ships in that shadow fleet that was referenced. Absolutely crucial. Those sanctions are working. Russia's federal oil and gas revenues fell 50% in 12 months from January last year, and Western sanctions have denied Russia access to at least $450 billion worth since February 2022. That is equivalent of funding for more than 2 years that could continue their war machine against Ukraine. I'm going to give way to the gentleman.
Can I thank the Minister very much for his response and for his words that he says of encouragement for us as MPs, but also for those of us outside here watching. Minister, in my intervention earlier on, I referred to Busha in particular, where the war crimes were absolutely unbelievable, and I'm very keen to ensure, we're all very keen to ensure that there's accountability and justice in the process. What are we, as a United Kingdom government and the Minister, who I know is committed to ensure that the evidential base is gathered to catch those people who have carried out those crimes and make them accountable? They will be accountable in the next world. Let's make sure they get it in this world as well.
Mr. Darcy.
Well, I completely agree with him, and this was a key part of that funding that the Foreign Secretary announced yesterday, but also the work that we've done to support the judicial system and investigations within Ukraine, but also our work at the International Criminal Court, the work we're doing around a special tribunal on the crime of aggression, the Claims Commission. There are many, many different ways in which we're going to seek justice and accountability. And he references Bucha. I mean, some of the most horrific things that I heard there, particularly the treatment and killings of priests and religious figures, and I spoke about that yesterday at the United Nations as well. And I think there's a very, very serious situation going on in the temporarily occupied territories in terms of freedom of religion and attacks on religious figures. And I spoke about that with our colleagues in the United States while I was in Washington, D.C. just before I was in the United Nations. I'll give way again once briefly, and then I want to respond to the points in the debate.
Hammer the nail on this point about insurance, and I don't expect the Minister to make policy on the hoof. But so many of the Ukrainians that we spoke to were so hard over on this point about insurance in London for the shadow fleet. Could he at least give the House a commitment now that he will go away and work with ministerial colleagues to see what more can be done in this area, because so many Ukrainians are asking for exactly that?
Well, it's a very important point, and I've had many, many different conversations with the insurance industry over the last year and a half. We are continuing to look at all ways to choke off the energy revenues to Russia. I'm not going to pre-announce, obviously, decisions we might come to, but we've been very clear about what we see as the track on this. There were a substantial number of measures announced yesterday, including actually illicit oil trading networks that were at the heart of some of the sanctions that we announced yesterday, and you'll be able to catch up. I'm happy to offer further briefings on that. I'm going to just respond to the points that were. I'm going to just respond with respect. I'm just going to respond to the points that were made in the debate. I'll happily come back if we've got some time at the end. Many members raised the issues around deportation of children. This is a personal passion for me, having met some of those children, and the work of the member for Paisley and Renfrewshire South has been mentioned. I was able to hold a meeting yesterday with a number of European and other countries, Canada, and also with Mariana Betsa, the Ukrainian Deputy Minister, in New York, to discuss our work together on this issue. Specifically, we're closely working with the United States, the EU, Canada as chair of the coalition, and of course directly with Ukraine. We've committed more than $2.8 million to support efforts to facilitate return and reintegration. And since September, the pilot tracing mechanism that we have been working with Ukraine on has identified over 600 additional children who were deported to the Russian Federation or relocated within temporarily occupied territories. And we're working with a number of the NGOs and others on this. I can absolutely assure the House that we will continue to see this as a major priority, and we are most focused on the measures that work, that can actually identify, trace, return, and of course reintegrate and support those people who have been affected. We've also sanctioned, of course, 11 more perpetrators in September of Russia's heinous policy in this area. In terms of overall financial support, I'd remind the House that we have committed up to 21.8 billion for Ukraine. That's 13 billion in the military support that the Defence Secretary spoke about, including our 2.26 billion ERA loan contribution, up to 5.3 billion in non-military support, and also export finance cover via UKEF, which has been crucial for reconstruction and defence projects. We're continuing to get that money out the door to get it to the Ukrainians, and to continue to look at all ways in which we can enhance our programmes. And I've particularly worked with our teams, our fantastic teams who work on the ODA budget for Ukraine, to make sure we're focusing in on that support, particularly for the energy system, and particularly for some of that work into long-term reconstruction, which will be needed. Members raised the point about Russian sovereign assets. I'm just going to respond to these two more points. On Russian sovereign assets, we were always clear that we would move in parallel with international partners on this, and in light of the EU decision that some people will be aware of, we will nevertheless continue to work with the G7 and the EU to ensure Ukraine gets the support it needs and make sure Russia will ultimately pay for the damages that it has caused. And we welcome the agreement at the European Council to provide this new 90 billion loan, and the Prime Minister welcomed the steps that could allow the UK to take part in that 90 billion euro loan to Ukraine as well. So we're going to explore all opportunities to get them what they need. I'm going to give way there and there.
I'm most grateful to the Minister, and had I got here a little earlier, I would have tried to make my own speech. But there are three particular home truths that I think we've brought back with us. The first is that we were asked so often, why do all these rich Western European countries only give us enough to continue fighting but not enough to win? And unless we're changing that, we're just offering a recipe for a continuing war. Have no doubt, this is the second point, that the Ukrainian government is resolved to carry on fighting in the absence of an acceptable peace settlement. And if that means planning for the next 2 or 3 years, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about collapsing at all. And that will never happen. I make that forecast. And finally, they're grateful for the coalition of the willing initiative. They're very disappointed the United Kingdom and France were the only two countries to sign the memorandum at the end of that meeting. And nothing subsequently has really happened since. And they're very concerned about the lack of war readiness amongst NATO forces, seeing how utterly transformed Ukrainian forces are in terms of their capability to fight the Russians. What are we doing to transform our armed forces so that with limited manpower, like the Ukrainians, we can hold back a Russian advance and ultimately protect NATO?
Doughty.
Well, I've been very clear, and the Defence Secretary is very, very clear about our commitments in terms of military support and, of course, the non-military support, and those endure and will continue to endure, and we will continue to stand with Ukraine as long as it takes. But we were also, rightly, and this was brought up in the debate on a number of occasions, ensuring that we are learning as well. This is a two-way process. We are learning from Ukraine as well. In terms of that preparation for our own defences, I went to see the incredible work that we do in the Baltics just 3 weeks ago in Latvia, and the incredible work in the drone coalition, not only supporting Ukraine and of course through the Octopus drones, but also learning ourselves on the tactics and techniques that are being used. So I can absolutely assure him and other members who raised that that this is going on. I will give way, but I just do want to respond to some more points. The point about Chelsea was raised, and the monies from the sale of Chelsea. Let me be clear again to the House. The government is giving Mr Abramovich the last chance to do the right thing and donate the 2.5 billion from the sale of Chelsea FC to support the people of Ukraine, as was committed to back in 2022. The House will know that we issued the licence in December, which permits the transfer of the funding into a new foundation. We've strived to find a way forward with Mr Abramovich. We would have preferred him to have taken that action with the cooperation of him and his company Foord. We are now urging him to honour that commitment, but if he fails to act quickly, we are fully prepared to go to court to enforce that commitment if necessary, and we are working with international partners to ensure that proceeds reach humanitarian causes in Ukraine as soon as possible. It was raised a number of times, the issue regarding refined oil products and indeed wider maritime services ban for LNG. We've announced our intention to ban imports of oil products refined in third countries from Russian origin crude oil. I recognise very much the points that were being raised, and we also intend to introduce a maritime services ban on liquefied natural gas phased in over 2026 in lockstep with the EU, which will restrict Russia's ability to export. The issue of imports and exports to the UK were raised, and I have some updated figures. I mean, we can provide these, but the most recent data shows that UK imports from and exports to Russia dropped by 99.6% and 87.6% respectively compared to 2021. So there has been a substantial change there. And in terms of the wider Russian energy sector, we have designated, along with the designation we made yesterday, Russia's 4 largest oil majors this year: Gazprom Neft, PJSC, Surguf Neft Gas on the 10th of January, and Rosneft and Lukoil on the 15th of October. And we're already having a clear impact. Chinese state oil majors are reportedly suspending purchases, Indian refiners are reportedly pausing new orders, and Russia's federal oil and gas revenues fell 50% year on year in January 2026. This is having a material impact on their ability to wage war.
Grateful to the Minister who's been most generous. We also met while we were there the member for Dudley, who had led a delegation of physiotherapists working with the Ukrainians as well. Another ask there was one that we perhaps didn't expect, was to hear there wasn't enough going on, as far as the Ukrainians were concerned, of British business coming out to do business, not so much to do good, but to do business, to integrate our trade, and that they felt there was a greater commercial engagement from other countries than there was from the UK, who they saw as a particularly good ally. And I wonder whether the Minister there's anything he could say about that, whether we, through obviously another department, DBT, we could do more to be taking more trade delegations and really leaning in to make sure we really support trade both directions.
Well, he raised an important point, and our trade envoy, the member for Leeds, is doing excellent work on this point, and we're looking to all opportunities to engage UK businesses in a range of sectors. Again, this is a two-way process. Our partnership with Ukraine is for 100 years. This isn't just about the support that we offer them now, it's about the opportunities for the future in a peaceful and secure and sovereign Ukraine. And I think UK and Ukraine working together, I think, is going to be a very powerful force in the world to come. Ukrainians in the UK were mentioned on a number of occasions, and we are very, very proud of what people across this country have done to support Ukrainians. Over 300,000 Ukrainians, their families have been supported. Ukrainians living in the UK can now apply to stay for an additional 18 months, and as was referenced, as of yesterday, Ukrainians wishing to extend their stay in the UK will now be able to apply up to 90 days before their current permission expires. That's treble the current 28 days, and we will continue to listen to Ukrainian communities, giving families a greater sense of security about their futures. There were questions about the multinational force. I'm not going to, for obvious reasons, get into details on this because it would be irresponsible to share operational details prematurely, but we are very, very clear that this will be a visible and tangible international support for Ukraine's return to peace. It will regenerate Ukraine's land forces, and it will establish and maintain safe skies, safe seas and strong borders. And of course, it is not just the contribution that we would make directly to that the Defence Secretary and Prime Minister have spoken. It is about that training and equipping of Ukraine's own armed forces, as we've done for so long in any case. We are going to continue to support a range of other projects in humanitarian energy, stabilisation, reform, recovery and reconstruction. We're working through BII. We are using every channel, every sinew, every way that we can stand with Ukraine, not just in words, but in practical terms of what we can do. There were many, many very helpful points made today. We will continue to offer briefings to members of the House, and as ever, my door remains open for those who've got very specific concerns. My honourable friend from Hemel, Hempstead and others raised some very particular concerns. I'm very happy to take those away from here. Also happy to offer briefings with officials on a number of the very specific technical topics that were raised. But I will give one last time and then I'm going to wind up.
I'm grateful to the Minister, and my specific concern is about this maritime services ban for the transport of Russian liquefied natural gas. It was announced by the Foreign Secretary last November, but it's not due to come into effect until the end of this calendar year. More than a whole year is what it's looking like it should take. Why need it take so long? Can the Minister explain?
As I set out a moment ago, is our intention to introduce this. We are working at pace. You'll appreciate these are extremely complicated measures, both legally and in terms of the procedures that need to be in place. And of course, it requires a substantial amount of international coordination because in order to actually have effect and not have loopholes around these things, we've got to be working very closely with other partners on this. So I can assure him that I'm personally working very hard to accelerate this as fast as we can. We need to do everything we can to choke off the revenues that are fueling the war machine, and it is a personal mission of mine to do that, and I'm very happy to give him further briefings on this outside of the House. But let me conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, by reiterating Ukraine's victory is not only essential for Ukraine, it is essential for Europe's future and essential for the future of this country. A secure, independent Ukraine strengthens Europe, it strengthens Britain. It reinforces the message that we took to the United Nations yesterday, that borders cannot be changed by force and that democratic nations will stand together against authoritarian pressure and barbarism. And as Ukraine enters the 5th year now of this phase of the invasion, we will continue alongside international partners to sustain the support that Ukraine needs today. And I want, in particular, to pay tribute to the incredible work not only of our teams in the Ministry of Defence, but also in the Foreign Commonwealth and Development Office, and particularly the team in Kiev and our new office in Lviv, for the incredible work they do, and particularly their country-based staff, because they are enduring the same as Ukrainians in terms of blackouts, in terms of attacks, in terms of winter conditions, and they do so with dedication, with absolute professionalism, and very much the spirit that is exemplified in this House today. They're exemplifying on the ground today, and I'm very delighted that members here have been able to meet with them. So can I end by again paying tribute to the Ukrainian people, to those fighting on the front lines, to the families separated, and to the civilians who are enduring hardship with extraordinary dignity. We will continue to stand with you. We will continue to support you. We will continue to support you every step of the way, because we know that your struggle is a reminder of what's at stake: freedom, self-determination and a rules-based order that protects us all. And we will stand with Ukraine today, tomorrow and for as long as it takes. Slava Ukraini.
I too also want to pay my tribute to the Ukrainian people and the many Ukrainians that live in my constituency of Sussex Weald. The question is that this House has considered the situation in Ukraine. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The front benches may wish to shuffle over if they don't want to stay for the rest of the afternoon.